Welcome, 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 everyone. This is the Option Menu Crew podcast, episode 7. With you today is your regular host, Ryan, and today with us is Paul. How you doing, Paul?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. We're still kind of in the middle of pandemic, so everyone's trying to be careful, but making our way, and obviously we're having a lot of fun recording these episodes of the podcast.
Definitely, yeah. I was gonna say I'm doing good. I guess for 2020, I guess is what should have prefaced that. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff going on here, but we're doing our best to have some fun. And so the topic we're going to do, we've been talking about this for a bit because we're both huge fans of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the whole franchise, and also specifically the video games that go along with that franchise.
yeah. I think we're both kind of in the same boat. I think that was one of the things that kind of drew us together when we worked together. It was like, oh, you like Ninja Turtles? I like Ninja Turtles. So like we have this whole history with Ninja Turtles. So definitely kind of a common ground there.
Absolutely, that definitely did help start our friendship. And I don't think it's rude to say you are the bigger Ninja Turtles fan than me. And I admire your love of Ninja Turtles, and my life didn't kind of go down that path. I've kind of diversified, but I've still loved them, and obviously we've shared a bunch of information, and we keep up with the series in different capacities. But that's something we want to talk about today is because of this, and with us starting the podcast and talking about video games before, we've talked about the Ninja Turtle games we played, and so among other things we'll discuss today, we thought it'd be fun to get together and kind of gush over Ninja Turtles and then talk about our own visions for what would be like our dream Ninja Turtles game. So super excited, we're finally doing that today. To kick things off though, let's talk to the audience about where our personal histories with TMNT started in terms of the whole series, not just the video games, but the shows, the comics, and obviously it started from the comics. So Paul, why don't you go ahead and go first and kind of tell me and everyone else like where did you get your start with Ninja Turtles?
Yeah, sure. So I might start. I feel like our starts are going to be probably pretty similar. But yeah, so I started. I grew up on the original cartoon. I was
Okay.
born in 1984, so I was like the perfect age for when the turtles were hitting their stride, so to speak.
Hmm?
With the popularity of the cartoon, of the original movies, all that kind of stuff. So pretty much when I was a kid, if you look back on old pictures, like I always had a Ninja Turtle shirt on, or sneakers. I had Ninja Turtle sneakers, shorts, whatever it was. My birthdays, I was always getting Ninja Turtles figures. So that was like my big thing from I don't know, say like age 5 to age 10 or something like that. Was just like strictly Ninja Turtles. I was all about it. So yeah, that was really my start was the cartoon, the original cartoon, the '87 one,
Hmm.
and then the movies as well because that was around the same time. The first movie was 1990, so
Yeah.
that same thing too. So that was my start. I don't know if you want me to go in the history yet, or you can give your start as well.
Oh, so yeah, where I started, I honestly can't remember if I saw the cartoon first or the movie first, and then like that bled over into the other thing. But it,
Hmm.
but it wasn't the comics. Like I didn't even know the comic existed for
Yeah,
a
same.
long time. And the other funny thing was I saw other people and drawings of the turtles, and I'd see like the box art from the video games in these different styles. And I'm like, oh man, why are they doing it so weird? But my young brain at the time, without much knowledge of how the video game industry was working, was oh, all these different box arts are weird and get different interpretations on things. So I figured, oh, they're just doing this crazy art style just for this. I had no idea. Like the one Game Boy game, I forget which one it was. It was like probably like the first Game Boy or the second Game Boy game because I did play all those. Like had the four turtles with all the red headbands, which was
Yes.
a comics thing. So that's like where I saw that, and I had no idea that was a reference to actual stuff. I was just like, oh, this is just weird box art for this game. But yeah, that's where I started was either the cartoon or the first movie, and then that bled over into the other. And obviously the movies are a huge deal. And while I also loved the toys, I had my own idiosyncrasies with how I wanted. I usually wanted the much more classic versions of the turtles. I rarely branched off into like the weird armor versions. I always tried to get like the most
Uh-huh.
plain ones, and then I would collect villains here or there that were I thought were cool. And then I also collected like Power Rangers and stuff. And collecting seems like a strong word. I was just kind of those are my favorite toys. And then I'd have them all like fighting and teaming up, which is also really cool that those would team up later. So that's basically where I got my start with the series. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about how that progressed for you over the years.
Yeah, so I was the same way as far as the comic goes. I know the comic obviously was the original thing for the tour. That was the start of it all. But I think most people our age are, as far as they were concerned, the cartoon was the first thing. That was the kid friendly version that they made, and that was what we grew up with. So as far as I knew when I was a kid, the cartoon was the original thing. Those were the original Turtles. I don't think it was until probably high school that I realized that there was a comic that started it all. And it was when I read it, I remember it was so much more violent and
Hmm.
totally different from what the cartoon was. So I was a little bit shocked. But yeah, so that came later. But yeah, so as things progressed, I had that phase, I'd say, in like middle school, like we probably all did, where I got out of Turtles for a little bit. You go through that where you're kind of too cool for school phase, where
Oh,
it's like,
sure,
oh,
yeah.
Turtles, that was the thing I liked when I was a kid. I'm more mature now.
There's also like
Um,
a big break between some of the series there, because like the cartoon and the
right.
next cartoon, like there's a huge break. So there's almost like no hype built.
Yeah, and that was the other thing too, because you had by the mid 90s the cartoon was like still going on, but it was kind of bad. And then you had the next mutation show, which was bad. So you that was kind of correlating with my age too. Like I
Oh
was
yeah,
at
yeah.
that point, I was like 12, 13. I was getting into middle school. The cartoon and that next mutation series were bad. They weren't doing any movies. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think it was kind of a combination of everything. But yeah, once I'd say when I got a little bit older, actually, probably into maybe like junior year of high school, I kind of started going back to that nostalgic phase.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, yeah, Ninja Turtles, they were pretty awesome. And fortunately, my parents had never got rid of any of my toys. So I still had all my original toys and action figures, all that stuff from when I was little. Pretty much since then, it's just been, I've been all about the Turtles. I was really into the 2003 cartoon. I thought that was
Yeah.
really good. And I was big into collecting stuff from there. So that when that cartoon came out, so I guess 2003, I would have been about 19. That was kind of the era when I had a job but didn't really have any bills yet. So I
Yeah.
was just like going out and buying any action figures that I could find on the shelves. So I have so much stuff from that cartoon. And yeah, from there, I mean, I loved the TMNT movie in 2007. I recently watched, actually, I didn't watch it when it was originally on, but I binged on Hulu the Nickelodeon cartoon from 2012. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
I've been big into collecting those figures as well. I watched Michael Bay movies with you. Actually, I think us and a couple other friends went to see
Yes,
them.
we did in
Didn't
theaters.
love them, but that's a discussion for another time. So
Right.
yeah, so pretty much, yeah, just a huge Ninja Turtles fan. As you know, I have an entire room in my house dedicated to the Turtles and my action figures and toys, posters, vehicles, whatever it might be, a little bit of everything. So I would say if I had to pick one thing in my life that I'm obsessed over, I don't know if that's the right word, but it would probably be Ninja Turtles. That's definitely the biggest thing that I collect, at least, is Ninja Turtles memorabilia. So yeah, that's just kind of a brief history of my experience with the turtles.
Yeah, I think that's all awesome, and it's okay to have some healthy obsessions. I think you're definitely managing it pretty well. You obviously own and maintain a home, so you're not going too crazy. And there are even bigger Ninja Turtles collectors out there, and obviously it's not supposed to be a competition, but I think we've talked about some of those videos where people who have actually collected old memorabilia from the movie sets and have like the turtle suits and heads from the first two or three movies and all those things on top of even more figures and collectibles from the TMNT series. It's amazing. And
Yeah.
I haven't gone so far into too much collecting. I kind of dropped out hard on my action figure phase at some point in my teenage years. Not necessarily like in any sort of like epiphany of like, oh, I hate these things. Like, it wasn't the edgy teenager thing. It was more like I just kind of realized I was like, well, I'm playing video games, and video games are kind of my new action figures. And I just like figured out I wasn't like having as much fun playing with the action figures anymore for whatever reason. And I just kind of put everything up for sale in yard sales, and I was just like, yeah, I really don't need these anymore. But I do still enjoy going whenever I go to a store that has toys, and which nowadays is like Target or Walmart.
Hmm.
I still go in the toy aisles and I take a look, and I do look to see what's the newest Ninja Turtle stuff and whatnot. And some of the stuff is cooler than it used to be, but other stuff it's been also very disappointing. Um,
Yeah.
so for me and my experience with like the series, yeah, it's the original cartoon, and I was super excited for the 2003 cartoon that aired on, is it Fox Kids or WB
Yeah,
Kids? One of
I
those
think it
kids.
it was. I want to say it was originally Fox Kids or Fox Box, I think they called it, and then it
Yeah,
changed to Cartoon Network or vice versa. I can't remember if it started on Cartoon Network then changed to Fox. It was one of the two. I
it was
know
def
at one point it was on both.
it was definitely on Fox for the longest time first.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
distinctly remember that because I was definitely super into the 2003 series, which skewed way darker, and
Yes.
it was trying to be more faithful to the comics because like they started out with the purple dragons before they even got into the foot soldiers, which I found out later was a comics thing,
Right.
and then just the darker tone in general and trying to be more mature, and a lot of the storylines, which some of them were copied from the old cartoon. They did make reference to those, and then of course there's also the special movie where they had the multiverse crossover, which was
Oh,
amazing.
I forgot to mention that. Yes, that was incredible.
I haven't watched that movie yet, but I do know I can get to it. Plus, I got to watch like those other fun crossovers, like Batman versus the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because
Yeah.
that's super cool. And it wouldn't be fair to mention that, or it wouldn't be fair to not mention how the current comics, or with some of the more modern comics, it was recently Power Rangers cross the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I don't know if that arc's wrapped up yet, but like Shredder gets to be the Green Ranger, and then the Turtles get to morph into Power Rangers, and April O'Neil gets to be the Pink Ranger as well. And so there's been all these cool all this cool Ninja Turtles resurgence. There's the
Yeah.
rise of TMNT cartoon that was on Nickelodeon that recently wrapped up and apparently had some production things. But that's I did want to segue back to the 2003, which was super good and went into space and had the Triceratons. Did I say that right?
Yep. Yeah.
The Utroms, which is the alien race that Krang was originally supposed to be a part of, but they never really delved into that in the original cartoons, as that skewed more towards kids, and then the merchandising and all that. But then the 2003, I remember distinctly this being on Fox because they never wrapped up the series proper on cable. Something
Hmm.
happened in like the last arc. I think they like started up like the intergalactic tournament arc, because I remember Usagi Yojimbo was introduced very briefly, and the turtles were gonna start fighting in the tournament, and I think it cut out somewhere in the middle, and then it just stopped at one point, and they stopped doing new episodes, and then suddenly they started advertising the semi sequel series of uh, TMNT Fast Forward. And I was like, what is this? And it took like a huge tonal shift that I just wasn't very into, and I kind of just ignored it. And I was very
Yeah.
upset by them dropping that.
Yeah. I
And
don't know if I ever watched Fast Forward. I think by that point I was like, this isn't very good. I think I watched like the first couple episodes and I was like, this, it's over.
yeah, and harkening a little bit before that, they tried to do that live action adaptation of New Mutation, where they introduced the not very well received female turtle Venus, because they
Yes.
tried to introduce a fifth turtle, and that character did not take off for several reasons with the fan base. Though it was impressive at the time that they tried to do the live action turtles again, and they had like the new suits, and they were doing like the old movies, so there was a huge nostalgia factor that was cool. And we got the 1 or 2 part Power Rangers in space crossover, and I'll never forget that because that was like, for me, I just geeked out so hard. Did you ever get a chance to see those episodes?
I don't think I have. You know what, I should, because, well, I don't know if it is anymore. I know Next Mutation was on Netflix for a while, I believe. I don't know if it is anymore. Yeah, Next Mutation, I never got into, but yeah, I really should go back and watch those, especially being a fan of Turtles and Power Rangers.
Oh yeah, I watched a few episodes of New Mutation while I was on there. I meant specifically, did you get to see the Power Rangers in space episodes?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Oh man, yeah, you should try and look those up on YouTube and see if someone's hosted there or a couple of clips, because it's at least pretty fun. And in that version, apparently the turtles can breathe in space, because obviously, as these kind of shows go, the resolution is the turtles and the Power Rangers are friends, and
Of
it
course.
ends with the Turtles being able to do space surfing on the Power Rangers, like cool space skateboards that can also turn into motorcycles, which is admittedly super cool. And I did have those toys, so I did mimic some of that. But yeah, that's some great silliness. And just to finish up on like the TV series stuff, I didn't watch the newer Nickelodeon show, which I think was like 2010 or 2013 or something like that. That was
2012. Yeah.
2012, which was fully CG animated. And at first I was kind of off put, but it was also kind of cool. And I was just like, I don't know. But then it went on for what, like 5, 6 seasons. It
Yeah, I
was
think it was 5. Yeah.
incredibly successful. Apparently, it struck also a really good balance of being like faithful to the comics or making a ton of comic references while also having brand new plot lines and reworking character arcs and things like that. Super well received. I heard nothing but good things as far as it went. And now that it's completed, I just have to go back and watch it at some point. And I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between playing a ton of games and catching up on TV shows. So I think at some point I'm going to get into that and sit there. And also, while Rise of the TMT apparently has been cut short on the uh, on the TV series, it did wrap up, and I, we talked about this when it was first debuted, and the look of the turtles and the art style wasn't very. We didn't have a very positive reaction at first, and
Yeah.
on. And honestly, for me, it wasn't until I saw the intro and I saw like this hyper active energy to the animation. Like the turtles did all these really cool moves and action things, and there was just a sense of energy that I'd seen in some of the best produced anime I've watched. And so I'm like, oh, if this art style, this much more simpler, weirder art style, allows for this, I think I'm going to be really into that. And then seeing some other clips from where the series went, I agree with that. On top of that, after watching I think like 2 episodes with a buddy of mine, he said, "Yo man, I watched a few episodes. I thought it was actually really good. I think you should give it a shot." I'm like, okay. We were doing something else. We just had it on the background. And I found myself I
Mhm.
was actually laughing a lot. I thought the character style and the writing personalities I meant, not the style. The style was still weird, but I've gotten used to it. But I thought it was just a very funny, well-written show. And once again, they've made some changes to the series. I've seen some people have some very not healthy reactions to. And I don't know if I should spoil anything from that, but if you don't mind, I'd actually like to ask you because I found out something recently that they changed in Ninja Turtles that maybe I'd like to see a reaction on.
I think I know what it is. So to kind of build on to what you're saying, I haven't watched Rise of TMNT. I was the same way as you. I didn't think it looked very good. So I had just got finished, like I mentioned earlier, watching the 2012 cartoon. I also didn't watch it when it was first on.
Hmm.
Like I said, I watched it when it was on Hulu. I think it was maybe last summer or summer before. I can't remember, but
Hmm.
and I binged it. Like I said, I thought it was amazing. I think you would love it. It was perfect. It might be my favorite cartoon, which is weird to say considering
Oh
I grew
wow.
up on the original.
Yeah.
They just did an absolutely amazing job with it. So anyway, so kind of coming right from watching that to Rise of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles starting, I don't know, it just felt like I just got done with this incredible show and this just didn't look nearly as good. I didn't like the animation, but
Hmm.
having said that, I can't give my honest review because I haven't watched it yet. Like I've seen, I'm in a couple Ninja Turtles groups on Facebook, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of controversy about this. Like some people absolutely hate
Oh
it,
yeah.
some
Then.
people love it and think it's great, and they get into big arguments about it. But I'll reserve judgment because based off, I've seen a couple clips you've sent me and some stuff on Instagram, but I can't really do an actual review based on that. So I'm waiting. I will watch it and I'll give it a chance and see what I actually think. I don't want to say I love it or hate it
Right.
based off just a few clips. So, but anyway, I have the feeling what you're going to say is Casey Jones. Is that what you're referencing?
Yes, I was gonna bring up the fact that, and I don't think the fan base really negatively reacted, other than the worst of people. But like April O'Neil is now a black girl in there, and
Right.
that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And from what I've seen, they've given her a bigger role again, which every series has slowly done, is try
Right.
to make April O'Neil more on par with the Turtles in terms of usefulness and character development, which is great. In the original series, she was pretty much just their friend, and
Yeah.
she got captured a ton, which the crossover movie made a joke that she's just always constantly being captured. And I don't remember later in the series if April with her classic yellow jumpsuit ended up becoming much more active. I don't think she ever became like a full-fledged ninja or learned
Yeah.
like to fight, but I think I can't understand. I don't remember how later in the arc if she became also more useful. But I know with the other series, like especially with the 2003 series that followed the comics more closely, and she ended up becoming she ended up deciding to train under Master Splinter. She was also actively like helping the turtles with investigations and missions later on where she could, along with partnering with Casey Jones, of course. But yes, for Rise of TMNT, what was your initial reaction to finding out Casey Jones had been turned into a female character and not like in some weird like oh she was a male character in the series and then turned into a female, but like was introduced as just this Casey Jones in this universe is female.
I and maybe this is me just being a purist. I'm not a fan of it. And again, I'd have to actually watch it to see maybe it is good. But it's just Casey Jones is not a female character. I don't, and this is not me being sexist. I would feel the same way if the opposite, if like they decided April is going to be a male character or something like that, you know what I mean?
Mm,
So
hmm
it
hmm
doesn't, it's not me just saying, well, I hate it because she's a female. It would go anyway. It's just, it's not Casey Jones. He's not a female. It doesn't make sense. My thing is if they were trying to be more inclusive and say like, oh, let's give some female characters bigger roles, really, maybe April was the only one who had a big role. Let's get some more female characters in there. I'm all about that. I'm totally fine with that. Let's get some more female characters, but they have existing great female characters to work with. You have Karai, who's one of my favorite characters of all time.
hmm
You have Angel, who was big in the 2003 cartoon, and I believe in the newer IDW comics, she has a big part. You have the Lopax, who they haven't done a whole lot with. So, I mean, that's just to name a couple. You could have done something with any of them. I don't like the idea of changing a character that's fully established. Or you could even create a new character, like you have a new series, create a new
Sure.
female lead, something like that. So yeah, that's just me. Maybe it's just being a purist, and like I said, it's not me being sexist because I would feel the same way if they turned a female character into a male character. It's just this is Casey Jones has always been a male character. Why change something that's worked for 30 plus years? I don't know. Like I said, I guess I would have to actually watch it to see how it came off. But my initial reaction was like, why? Just if you want more female representation, just take one of your existing awesome female characters and make them more of a featured character or add a new character or something like that. So that's my thought on it.
Okay. Yeah, and I've talked to some other people who have similar viewpoints with other comic series like Marvel or DC, and some of them echo the idea that it's not about whether or not it's not about them being turned into either male or female or a different gender than their original representation. It's more about that, if you're going to do it, like we come to this series for this specific character, and it's just like create a new character if you want to do something different. So I can kind of understand that. And me personally, I'm not really bothered by it because I always just I had to mentally process because I got really mad about several other series and things like that with new iterations and changes, and I just kind of I was forced to learn to make a mental divider and be like, okay, this doesn't ruin the good thing over here. It just means that when they do the new thing, I just ignore it and
Yeah.
it's not for me and whatnot. So I've made that leap in my mind, and I'm just okay. Like let's see what this interpretation is because it could be cool, and they've kind of announced that there is a multiverse to Turtles, so it's fine. This is just a different dimension. So I didn't really have that. I
Right.
was just surprised. I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
because
I was
I
like, oh, it's
it
different.
and what's funny, it hadn't occurred to me that in all of the clips I had seen of Rise that I hadn't seen Casey Jones yet. And then when I saw that clip going around and I read some of the comments, which is kind of why I was like, oh, I want to bring that up. I was like, oh, that's a thing they did. But all right, like fine. I haven't watched the series and I'm curious. I'm inclined to watch it and give it a fair judgment. So there's that. I did want to ask you a few other questions before we get into the video game portion because it's obviously it's just we're having a ton of fun talking about turtles, and I don't think we've really discussed some of these parts. Did you back in the day when the original series was going on? Did you remember all of the cross promotion with TMNT and Burger King with the Kids Club kids?
Yes, not well. I shouldn't say. I vaguely remember. I remember having a couple of the toys, specifically a Shredder one for some reason. And you know what? I was talking about earlier how I saved all my toys and I have the whole room and stuff. For whatever reason, I don't have any of the Burger King toys. I don't know what happened to them, but I specifically remember having a
Hmm.
Shredder one. But yeah, so I do remember that a little bit. Not like it doesn't stick out in my mind. I don't have great memories of it, but yeah, I
Okay.
definitely remember it being a thing.
So what sticks out to me was not necessarily the toys, and I'm sure I had a number of them, but that's not what was sticking out in my mind. What sticks out in my mind so much about this weird cross promotion was when I bought the VHS, because I actually bought a ton of the VHSs, or I should say my parents bought me a number of the VHSs, and I
Mhm.
think I don't remember if they actually sold them at Burger King or if it was just a matter of Burger King seemed to always have like the Burger King Kids Club. And for those who haven't seen, like, go back and it's actually it was one of those weird 90s promotions where it was surprisingly trying to be very diverse, but
Yeah.
I not the 90s version of what diverse looks like, which isn't necessarily bad, just not the same as the way we think of it today with in the year 2020. But I always remember those intros at the beginning, and that just was just formative in my brain because I did love eating at Burger King because I was a kid who doesn't love fast food and stuff like that. And I watched those videos incessantly. But then also it is funny because the turtles actually love pizza, and it's so weird that like Burger King and Turtles so strongly like built that, or at least in my mind, built that connection together of like this Burger King with Turtles, but pizza. And yes, like I believe Pizza Hut's done some stuff with the Turtles before. Obviously, with the movies, there was like Domino crossovers and things like that. But
Yeah,
uh,
and it's funny you mentioned the Burger King relationship because they actually still had that with the 2003 cartoon. Because I remember this because at the time I worked at a department store and I was right next to a Burger King. So I would go on lunch over there, and here I am, like 19, 20 years old, and I would get a kids meal just so I can get the whatever Ninja Turtles toys there was. So
yep.
I do have a handful of toys from the Burger King toys from the 2003 cartoon. So yeah, I guess for whatever reason they just had a good relationship there.
Yeah, and so that just stuck out to me because of the contrast of the pizza thing in the show versus burgers in real life, and I just always thought that was funny, and it's a great nostalgia trip for me because I just remember so much seeing those intros at like the beginning of the videos.
Yeah.
Next question I want to ask was, since you are a collector of the Turtles memorabilia, do you have any particular favorite pieces or a piece that you're hoping to get someday as well? I mean, you could talk about both. I'm just curious if you have
um,
specific aspirations or
yeah, I
favorites.
yeah, I have well both actually. Yeah. So I would say my favorite pieces are probably the kind of like the vehicles for or accessories or whatever you want to call them from the original cartoon. So like the
Yeah,
Technodrome, the Turtle Van, the sewer layer playset.
yeah.
Just because they're really intricate. Like they had a lot of detail to them. I
Hmm.
don't know if you remember they would come with like stickers you could put all over them and stuff
Oh
like
yeah.
that. You kind of decorate them how you wanted, and they still look really cool. Like I still have all three of those that I just mentioned, and they look nice today. Like I think they hold up really well. Like it's not like you look back and like this is kind of cheesy. Like they can make something way better today. I'm sure a lot of stuff they make today is better, like you said earlier. But
Some
yeah,
of it
I just think
is.
those are
Some
really cool.
the Michael Bay movie figures were, I thought they were absolute trash because those turtles were supposed to be way more detailed than the movie, and it just
Yeah,
didn't translate well to cheap plastic figures.
it looked very cheap, yeah.
But for
but
like the 2012 series and the 2003 series, since they were much more animated but much less detailed, that those translated extremely well to
yeah, they looked real good.
figures.
But yeah, so those I would say if I had to pick a favorite, those type of toys would be my favorite. Those original series, Technodrome, Turtle Van, Sewer Lair playset, that type of stuff, just because of the amount of detail that was put into it and how cool looking they were.
Okay, a
Um,
couple follow-up questions there, because I did have some of those. I forget if I had the Technodrome, if one of my friends had the Technodrome, or if we both had it. I forget. But the turtle sewer playset, totally had that. And I wanted to ask you, did you put all the stickers on?
I believe I did. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember, but I'm sure I did. I know I have them on there. I don't know if it was all of them, but as far as I know, I put them all in. When I was a kid, I used to love sticking stickers on things. I've got like old like shelves and stuff that I just have random
Yeah.
stickers on. So I would imagine that I probably put all of them on.
Okay. I went through a sticker phase as well, and I was just curious if this happened for you. It might just be me with my OCD tendencies. Was that after a while I started hating stickers because I'd want to put them on perfectly and I'd get so upset. And if you tried to do it more than once, if you make a mistake, eventually they start peeling and obviously stickers can get ruined. So it was one of
Yeah.
those things where you want the set to look so perfect, but eventually as a kid, like the wear and tear sets in and it almost looks ugly and it almost feels not worth it. So that was one thing I wanted to see where you stood on at that time. The other thing was, since ooze was a huge deal, did you ever dump ooze onto the playset or did you keep it separate?
I did not. Luckily, I'm kind of glad I didn't.
Yeah.
I think I wanted to, but I don't know why. I never did. Yeah, as a kid, it seemed like the coolest thing ever. But like now thinking about it, like, well, I'm really glad I never did that.
Yeah, I did do it once because I remember I just wanted to, and then I did have to clean it off a couple times. And also, I had going off topic for a little bit was the Ghostbusters tower as well, which is actually pretty huge for a kid's toy. Which, once again, similarly asked you to dump goo on as part of the play feature, so you could get the
Mhm.
ectoplasm for Ghostbusters and dump that through the roof
That's right.
of the tower there. And I think I might have had the turtles and the sewer playset mixed with that because I mean they're technically both in New York, so that wouldn't be. I wonder if they ever did a crossover because that would be so crazy.
They did.
I,
So it's you meant funny you mentioned that they in the IDW comic they did a Ninja Turtles
right.
Ghostbusters crossover.
I
Oh,
meant in
back
the
then I don't know if
cartoons
they. Yeah, back then I don't think they did, to my
because they were the same
knowledge.
kind
But
of cartoon and they might have even been done by the same studio.
yeah, the animation's very similar. But yeah, to my knowledge, I don't think they ever did a crossover back then. I think the only
Hmm.
one was that comic. And I have the four figures that they did. They did like Donatello as Egon, and etc. Yeah, but that was all based off the comic. Yeah, so to my knowledge, they didn't do one from the cartoon.
Nice. I
But yeah.
believe.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I think I also had the turtle van, one of the turtle vans. I don't
Hmm.
remember how much, or it might have been because I also knew a bunch of people that also had turtles toys. So I may be confusing what I had versus what other people had.
Ah,
Uh,
yeah.
and or borrowing toys and things like that because sometimes I would borrow and have it and then I'd give it back after a couple weeks.
Right.
The next thing I wanted to ask because this is one of those things once again where toys break down over time. Do you have a turtle blimp with a blimp that doesn't have a hole in it?
Well, actually, so this kind of answers the other part of your other question. You were saying if there are any pieces that I want, and that is one. For some reason I never had the turtle blimp. Not when I was a kid. Not
Oh
since I've been
wow.
older. I've never managed to get a hold of the turtle blimp. So that is like as far as my list goes of like my want list, my wish list of Ninja Turtles items. The turtle blimp is at the top of the list, and I would love to get one. With the actual blimp intact and no holes in it or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know why. When I was a kid, I never got it. Since I've been an adult, I've never picked it up anywhere. So yeah, that's definitely the number one item I want, and I would hope to get it fully intact.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, that was very convenient. That question led into that.
Yeah, perfect.
So the next thing I did want to ask also, and kind of cycling back to like the newer female characters, is you follow the comics more than I do, and I just kind of look at comic news. So I did want to ask for your reaction of this, or if you've had a chance to read any of the arc from the newer comic, and I'm not sure if it's the IWD or if it's a offshoot or something. With they recently introduced a new fifth turtle and a female, which from what I understand is actually going over well with the fan base. The character's name is Jenica, and she's a former Foot Clan member. And I guess this is a little bit spoilers for the comics, but she ends up working with the Turtles while she's human and defecting from the Foot Clan. They get into some sort of fight, and she's nearly fatally wounded. And the only way to save her at the moment is for her to get a blood transfusion. Leonardo is able to give her the blood transfusion, and the mutagen from his blood ends up turning her into a turtle, and she dons a yellow mask and uses a Wolverine style claw weapon from what I understand from the comics. So, is that something you've been exposed to so far, not just in terms of hearsay, but actually reading the arc? And what are your current feelings on that?
You know what? I have been very behind on the comics. It's been a couple years actually since I've read them, so I've heard of it. But I'm not actively following the comics like I would like to. It's a great comic series. I just haven't
Yeah.
been following it. Our friend Lou, mutual friend,
Hmm.
he's actually been faithfully following it. As far as I know, he's fully caught up. So he's kind of kept me in the loop with some stuff that's happening. But yeah, from the way you described it, it sounds like a really cool story. I like that direction of it. So my personal idea for a fifth turtle, regardless of whether it was male or female, I wouldn't like the idea of them like just being in the group, being like, oh, there's like five turtles now because it's the four turtles. That's classic. Like Leonardo,
Hmm.
Donatello, Raphael, Michelangelo. That's what you have.
Okay.
You don't need a fifth. I don't care if it's male, female, whatever. It's the four of them. But the way you described it with this fifth turtle, I like that idea of how she was kind of worked into the group. I guess, my only negative would be, other than the mutation part, the storyline sounds kind of similar to Karai, where she was like a member of the Foot Clan and then kind of turned and went with the turtles, became kind of honorable, whatever. That seems a little too similar to Karai, kind
Hmm.
of. But I like the idea that she had to get mutated because of blood transfusion. That's interesting. Yeah, so I have no problem with a fifth turtle being like a sidekick, like a Casey Jones type sidekick,
Hmm.
because it's realistic that other turtles would get mutated. I mean, you do have like Slash, for example, who's been part of the series. A different kind of turtle, but still a
Yeah.
turtle.
Slash or
Um,
Toka.
yeah, Toka. Yeah, that's another one. So yeah, I think it's kind of cool actually to have a fifth turtle that is like a sidekick. I wouldn't want them like, as like, let's say the series started and like kind of like Next Mutation, like, oh, there's five turtles now instead of four. I don't like that idea. But yeah, as far as the sidekick goes, I think that's cool. And going back to our point about Casey Jones, is there's a perfect way if you want more female representation, there's a perfect way to introduce a new female character instead of taking an established character and making them female. That it sounds like a really cool character. I'm definitely looking forward to reading more about it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty neat, and it is kind of one of those established things that's really difficult for anyone to mess with is that balance of these four turtles, the four brothers. It's a nice even number. It leads to interesting pairings and dynamics between all the characters. And as the series have gone on, they've shown that they can just mutate other creatures. But it would always be well. New Mutation also said, they experimented with Venus, but the way it worked for her was I think I'm not misremembering right. I think she was like mutated with them, but then she got shipped to Japan, or she like went down a drain and ended up in Japan or something like that. And that's why she was trained there. But I wouldn't be opposed to the idea, especially since the Utram are aliens, and they're responsible for creating that ooze, whether on purpose or accidentally as a byproduct of their experiments. Them being like around the globe and other animals being mutated, and of course the different series talk about both mutants from the Utroms who are aliens, or just other species from different dimensions or different planets. And those are all also, as you kind of mentioned, are acceptable ways that they can mix in different characters and provide more diversity without necessarily trying to force this idea of, oh, here's a fifth turtle, because they could always do different animals. But there's, I guess at this point, I mean, with the series, there's just something special about the turtle that makes it interesting and fun when it's mixed with that dynamic.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And not that we have to really get into this, because I don't really have cohesive thoughts on the idea, and this different series also play around with this, and it gets weird as always. How do the turtles deal with romance? And obviously, like in the 2012 animated series, Donatello has a huge crush on April. In the Michael Bay movies, they've got Michelangelo hitting on April, and etc. They've experimented with all these different things here, and Casey Jones and April in most series end up having some sort of romance. But the turtles themselves and how they deal with romance, whether that be with other animals or with humans, and that is very secondary to the series, or even Leonardo with Karai. At least my understanding from that information is from the 2003 animated series with Karai. And I did really like Karai's representation of how she was always conflicted, how she knew the Shredder was a terrible person, but he still raised her as her daughter and took care of her, and how she kind of kept bouncing back and forth from like, well, I understand he's not the best person, but he's also my father, and I'm honor bound, but I know you guys aren't bad, and it's she had to do this delicate balance, and she always kind of still falls back on the evil side, at least in that cartoon. She fell back on the evil side because she's like, I have to honor this legacy, and it's not the way I would have done things, and it's just not fair. And she never quite found her own way of striking that balance without being good. And I always thought she was a nice, complex character for that regard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's what I
it's
love about Cry.
yeah.
She is very complex. Yeah, that's why she's always been one of my favorite characters for that reason. Is that like she's evil, or at least she starts as evil, but like she always has honor. She's not like Shredder, who's just like purely evil. Like she has honor, so she tends to like side with the turtles at times, or see, I always like that about her. So
Yeah,
yeah.
she tries to undermine the Shredder without totally disrespecting his goals, and it was very interesting because Leonardo always tried to appeal to the fact that, hey, if you have honor, then you shouldn't be doing all these evil things, which are, at least in his perspective, by nature dishonorable, and her trying to reconcile the different parts of her life. So that's always
Mhm.
fun, and I'm not saying that if there are female characters there has to be romance with the turtles. It just gets to a weird, awkward point where if the for interesting storylines, not that it couldn't be done well and isn't worth exploring at some point, and I'm not sure how well the comics have explored things like that, but that's where some of that is, where introducing other female characters could also get a little weird because there's obviously people who do want to find out how that works or how that would work. So that's where those
Yeah.
ideas, and if you introduce one female turtle between these four male turtles, like, is this a thing? Obviously, it doesn't have to have romance, but that's where some of this gets messy conceptually, and I can understand why they don't want to get too close to that, especially with the way the series is, and it's supposed to be more kid friendly.
Yeah, they did a good amount of like exploring, I guess, with that in the 2012 cartoon. You mentioned Donatello. Yeah, he was pretty much in love with April the entire series, and there was a lot of interesting dynamic with Casey Jones because he was also in love with April. So
Yeah.
Donatello and Casey Jones tend to like butt heads. So in the 2012 series, this was a little different. Casey Jones and April were the same age as the Turtles. They were both in high school,
Yeah.
which I thought was interesting because normally they're a little bit older.
Yeah.
So I thought it actually made a little bit more sense to have them all the same age. So
Yeah.
Donatello and Casey Jones tended to like butt heads a lot because they're both like wanting April's attention and love. So they went there, and then Leonardo always kind of had a thing for Karai. They never went super far with that, but he like right from the first time he met her, he kind of had a crush on her. Um,
Okay.
and then Raphael had a relationship with Mona Lisa, who was when they did their space arc in, I think it was maybe season 4. They did
Hmm.
the space arc, and she was an alien. I forget what the alien race was called off the top of my head, but
Hmm.
and she had a different name too. Raphael just called her Mona Lisa because it was like easier.
Okay.
And they actually had like a full fledged relationship, like they were actually dating. And then Michelangelo was in love with Renette, who was a time traveler. I think she was from the original comics, and he was in love with Shinigami as well, who was in the last couple seasons. So yeah, all of them had their like experiences with love in that cartoon, and I think it does kind of make sense. I mean, like you said, you have to find that balance because it is a kids show, but think about turtles. I believe are supposed to be 15, so if you're 15 years old, like you're probably falling in love with girls, especially girls that are
Yeah.
close to your age. So I think it makes sense to at least explore that on a basic level.
Okay. Yeah, and I googled Mona Lisa to see what she looked like with the character, and as you were saying it, it started to make the most sense that it's the most appropriate that she's a gecko, an alien gecko, so that makes a lot of sense there. She looks way more like natural than Raph does. And I see tons
Yeah.
of pictures of them together. So actually, that would probably be the safest way to do that, is because an alien would have a completely different concept of attraction and relationships than, the way we think of on Earth.
Yeah,
So,
right. And they're to them like the turtles wouldn't be outsiders, I guess. Like even to April, who's
well, they'd all
good
be
friends with them.
outsiders, and they'd have their own concepts of like what looks handsome or attractive as a
Exactly. Yeah,
species.
like the
So,
turtles would aren't like if you're April, even though you're friends with the turtles and you're close with them, the turtles are different looking. Like
yeah,
that's whereas these alien races, they encounter people maybe that don't look exactly like the turtles, but that look different all the time. So it's maybe
Exactly.
not as much of like a shocking thing to see somebody that looks like Raphael.
Yeah. So it ends up working out a lot better if it's something abstract like that. Of course, there is interesting stories you can still do if you're talking about like the turtles having to acclimate to human society because they grew up on human pop culture and they
Hmm.
embrace that to a certain degree, and so they can have these feelings where, well, we're kind of they could go through semi-human experiences where they feel like they need to have relationships but they can't be with humans and humans don't want to be with them, etc., in terms of romance. And we're getting way too far into the weeds with this,
We're
but
getting off on a
once
tangent
again,
here. Yeah, this
like
was
this
what
series,
happens.
this is the fertile ground which will probably lead into like the kind of stories that TMNT can have. And before move on, I just wanted to ask this question regarding storytelling. So you brought up how the turtles, are about 15, 16, depending on the adaptation. And of course, there are times where time skips happen and we see them when they're older, or we see flashbacks to when they're younger, or there's shenanigans with aging. What's your feelings about a Ninja Turtle series that might actually follow the turtles through the age and see them actually grow out of the teenage years? And if we're actually looking, if we tried to chronologically catalog any one of these series, I'm sure they go over the years. And I think the 2013 actually does try to age them up a little bit over time, at least in terms of series timeline. Like they do actually go through years, and so they do age a little bit in terms of that. But what's your feelings on seeing series either do that where they experiment with the turtles actually being older and non-teenagers versus, trying to kind of capture that one moment in time, kind of like Simpson style, where nobody really grows; they just kind of
Yeah.
collect experiences.
Yeah, I personally would love to see a series where they grow. I mean, I'm fine with it the other way too, like you said. I mean, because it is a cartoon, so it's easy to do where they just stay the same age the whole time. But I think it would be interesting to see them like start off as these 15-year-old teenagers and kind of grow and grow. The closest I could think of that they did that with was the TMNT movie, where they were older.
Yeah.
They didn't grow, obviously that was just their age in the movie, but they were. I thought it was really interesting how they did that, where like the turtles were older, they had been kind of broken up. Like Leonardo was, I think he was in Brazil, if I remember
Mm.
correctly.
South America or
Donatello was
something, I
like
believe
working
so.
like an IT job. Raphael was out doing like
Vigilante.
the vigilante stuff, yeah. And Michelangelo was like a party guy doing like
Yeah.
these parties for kids. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Like, oh, they're older, they've kind of separated, they're doing their own thing. I like that idea. I would like that to be explored further, and I would definitely be up for a series that had them age as the series aged.
Yeah. Time had passed in that movie, and they made a note of that, as it was technically, if not fully officially, a sequel to the original three
Right.
movies. It's definitely something where I think also as us as as humans who actually grow older, we like our series to grow with us. And definitely the Turtle series has done a lot, especially in the comics, to try and give the turtles these experiences and have them grow as people, but it never necessarily commits to them actually being outside of teenagers. And that like a 4 to 5 year span, essentially from like 15 to 16, or you could start even them super young if you wanted, like all the way from like they're 13 and this is when their stuff goes, and then you could do 7 years of turtles being quote unquote teenagers and having them growing up and reaching that
Right.
peak. And so yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be nice to actually see a series that like grows and eventually goes from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Ninja Turtles, and
Yeah.
just seeing that progression. And of course, other storylines have shown, and I think there might be a new one that's kind of doing that, but I don't really want to get into that for spoilers, or also just because I just don't know enough. But there's clearly other timelines and things where they talk about the turtles being older and characters have passed away, tragic things have happened to the turtles, and they've been fighting. So it's not like it's a foreign concept. It hasn't seemed to be fully fleshed out from any of the series that I've been exposed to or storylines I'm aware of.
Yeah. Right.
Transitioning from just the series itself to the video games, let's talk a little bit about what video games we've experienced to give each other and the audience context for what we're drawing on as for how we would envision our ideal Ninja Turtle game. So, Paul, where'd you start with the video games, and as best you can, which ones have you played?
So I started with the Nintendo games, and pretty much those are the only ones I've played. I honestly haven't played very many of the newer games. So I think the first ever game I played was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game for Nintendo. And I
Hmm.
remember not caring for it as a kid just because, well, first of all, it's really hard, and it's still to this day.
Yeah.
And also, it has a lot of just like random stuff, like not from the cartoon, or I don't even think from the comics. Like a lot of the people, the villains that you fight are just like weird things. Like I'm not
Hmm.
sure like where they came from. So I didn't care for that. I just thought it was very strange. The next one was the arcade game, which I loved and I still love to this day. And then Manhattan Project is great. Turtles in Time for Super Nintendo is great. The thing I like about those three games, the Turtles 2, the arcade game, the Manhattan Project, and Turtles in Time, is that they're two player, which that original game wasn't. So you could play with your friend, which back
Right.
then was awesome. And they are they incorporate stuff from the cartoon way better. You know, you're fighting foot soldiers, you're fighting villains from the cartoon, the bosses are villains from the cartoon,
Hmm.
and they're just a lot of fun. Like, you know, I if I had to pick a favorite, they're all great. If I had to pick a favorite, I think the second one is probably my favorite. It's probably the most repetitive of all of them, but it's just so much fun and it's so
Hmm.
good. And I think I have the most memories with that game. So those are my favorites. Those are my earliest experiences. And besides that, the only game I really got into, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. I can't remember what the game is called. It might have just been called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but I had it on the
Yeah.
PS2. Came out in 2003 or 2004, based off that 2003 cartoon, and that was fun. They tried to make it similar to those old school games where it was just like a beat 'em up. You just kind of run through the levels. You fight people from the cartoon. They made it very faithful to the cartoon.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. Like I said, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It was just good. It was fine. But that was it. For whatever reason, I've just never been able to get into a Turtles game since then. So my personal experiences, actually, I shouldn't say that. There's a game I'm currently playing on my phone, TMNT Legends.
Hmm.
That some of my ideas that we'll get into about our dream game are kind of based off of. But anyway, that's so we'll talk about that more later. But as far as actual console games, those are really my only experiences. So I'm very much more geared towards the originals.
Okay. Did you have a chance to play any of the Game Boy games?
I didn't actually, or if I did, it was very limited. Maybe like at a friend's house. You know, I might have played with them a little bit, but yeah. So if I did, it was very limited. I don't have a ton of memories about that.
I forget which one it was because I think there was also three, and they were all single player. For the
Hmm.
original Game Boy, we're not talking some of the other iterations, which I actually didn't really play any of the other handheld iterations past the original Game Boy, mainly because by that point I became a little more discerning in my taste, and it just never seemed as fun to play those ones. And I stopped playing Turtles games pretty much, or most of them. I dabbled with a few, whether through rentals or demos or things like that. One of the Game Boy ones, you actually start off, I believe, playing as Michelangelo, and you have to unlock the other three turtles. So
Okay.
that was just like an interesting conceit where, like, the conceit was all the turtles had been locked up. It might have actually been Donatello or something like that. But you start off with one turtle and you have to save the other three, and all of those games were super hard, as most games were back then, because they were probably only like 3 hours long, and the only way to actually drag that out was to make it so hard that kids would need dozens and dozens of hours to actually get good enough to beat
Right.
them. So yeah, for my history as well, I started with the original game on Nintendo, and that was super hard. I've never beaten it. I don't think I've ever even got past like the second part of the map because
Yeah, it's very difficult.
those water stages were terrible. Fighting the
Oh,
tanks was
worst.
awful. There's
Yeah.
tons of bugs. That game is just notorious for being a time sink, and I think
Hmm.
the easiest way you can beat that, and I think there's still like a broken jump in one area that requires a very specific way to get around it, or you can't get through it without like a specific turtle. Would be like using an emulator where you could do save states in order to make sure you're saving and being able to retry as many times as you need.
Yeah.
I played TMNT2 on the NES, which was the arcade port, or port downwards. It should be. I played the arcade version. I don't remember if the arcade version of 2 was actually 4 players as well, but That's the other. And then I did play a ton of three. I did actually like three a lot, and I forget if I ever beat that one, but I kept getting pretty far. But then I was lucky enough to play tons of TMNT 4, Turtles in Time, in the arcade cabinet, which had 4 players. I
Ooh,
wanted to
nice.
ask you, did you ever get a chance to really play 4 players on the 4 player cabinet?
I don't think I did, and that would have been awesome. But no, my experience with Turtles 4, Turtles in Time was just on the Super Nintendo. I don't believe I have actually ever played it on the arcade cabinet, although that sounds amazing.
Though we did try playing the 4 player version online through a browser port, which we couldn't unfortunately get to play together, but we were
That's
playing
right.
the arcade version, which the arcade version and the Super Nintendo version have different levels besides
Right.
being 2 player on Super Nintendo because, well, you could have gotten the multi tap at that point, but they didn't put in the 4 player support. The Super Nintendo probably couldn't handle it, or at least for the version they created. And then the arcade version was shorter, but the graphics were slightly higher resolution. I think it had more sound effects and things like that.
Right.
So we'll still have to revisit and see if we can try and
Yeah.
find a way to play that online. Because if we
I
could, us and our friends, that'd be tons of fun.
Yeah, I have read actually that Turtles in Time is one of the better arcade ports because I know a lot of times you hear, especially back then, how like, oh, this game was awesome in the arcade and then it got ported to a home console and like
Yeah,
it was just terrible. Like it just lost. The graphics were worse. The gameplay was worse. It lost a bunch of stuff. But I've actually heard that or read that Turtles in Time is one of the better arcade ports. That they did a really good job of carrying it over from the arcade to the home console.
right. We did lose the 4 player function, which was fine, and there was a downgrade in graphics, but the game was by no means ugly, and
No, yeah,
it went from I think the arcade version only has like 6 or 7 levels, and the Super Nintendo version ends up having 10 levels, and I think they actually swapped out or changed the order of some of them.
yeah. I think you're right. That
So
sounds right. I remember reading about that. Yeah.
it was definitely enhanced in that regard. So that was cool. And then within the last 5 years, I'm pretty sure I'd have to look it up. They did try to remake it because that is like the most lauded Turtles game, at least to date. They ended up doing this weird thing where they did like the 2D, 3D graphics. Well, it was still a beat 'em up, but they used like 3D graphics and they tried to emulate the style of that game, but in some weird hybrid form. But then I guess it felt terrible. The online, I think, didn't work too well, and it didn't include all the Super Nintendo levels. It only was like the arcade version. I think it was still missing like a level, or like took one level from the Super Nintendo version and the rest of the levels from the arcade version. Although there was a lot of crossover. It was just apparently really messy. It's so sad that it was such like an easy slam dunk it would have been for a Turtles like nostalgia fan, and they just didn't put the effort into it. But that's
Yeah.
also kind of the curse of licensed games is they don't ever do that well,
Right.
or they never get the money and attention they need to unless they, which there are some licensed games that do get the TLC they deserve, and then they're amazing and they sell incredibly well for years. But it's always tough for kids, quote unquote, properties to get taken seriously and made into proper video games. But to finish off my history, so I played through most of that, and then there was kind of like a drop off in Turtles games, let alone Turtles quality. We both ended up playing the Turtles game based on the 2003 cartoon, and they did have 3 games for that as well. Both played the first one. You played on PS2, I played it on GameCube, and then I believe I experimented with either the second or third one because those changed up a bit, and I was like, oh, these aren't too bad. I can rent these and I can blast through them and have some fun. And I don't think I actually beat them, but they were at least neat for the time. And then I dabbled with some of the ones that were based off of the that new movie that came out. There was yeah, there was a weird game that came out like after the TMNT game, but before the Michael Bay one. It had like this weird art style, which it mimicked like the 2013 proportions of the Turtles, but instead of doing the actual animated style, it did like the more highly detailed style that was like you see in the TMNT version, and it was like a crossover of that. I'll have to send you like a picture because it's
Yeah.
super weird. But I played that. There was a demo on Xbox 360, and it was all right, but I was like, nah, it just didn't come
Yeah.
through.
Just not right. Yeah.
And so I kind of ignored that. I did play one of the newer Turtles games that was based off the 2003. It was an arcade game, basically a beat 'em up, super easy. I actually beat the game while I was in the arcade. It took me like I think an hour and a half to beat it, and I beat it solo. I think a few people jumped in here or there, but it was super easy. And I did have unlimited
Mhm.
credits. We were doing like a business function that rented out this arcade place, and I ended up being able to just do free play. So that's basically why it was so easy.
Nice.
But I got that out of my system. And then I more recently rented Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutants in Manhattan that was, I believe, published. Yeah, it was part of the Activision deal with Platinum Games. That was actually pretty neat because the first I sent, and that's the one I sent you the trailer for.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the coolest art style I've ever seen for a Turtles game. It's more anime-ish, but it's also got tons of ink lines and stuff that makes it look very comic booky, and it's like somewhere in between the newer proportions, but also this weird anime hybrid aesthetic for it. The saddest thing was it was kind of only online multiplayer, but after playing it, like I get why it kind of was made to be that way. It's just really disappointing that the rest of it didn't work out. The turtle, it was actually a pretty decent action game, but there was some jank to it where it didn't flow as smoothly as I would have liked. You could switch between playing as all four turtles, and they were all on screen at the same time, so that was neat. But the bosses ended up not being much fun, and there was some also weird other elements to gameplay that was just kind of jank or it was padded, and
Yeah.
it's just kind of sad where it's like if this was given a little bit more care, they really had something special here. Like they had a bunch of cool looking bosses. The turtles played really fun. It just needed some tweaks and some balancing to really make it special. But that's it's kind of the curse of the TMNT games is that they're all basically beat 'em ups, and there's rarely ever something else. And it's understandable because they want co-op, and the ninja action is kind of what draws the general audience to it, at least for the video games. Oh, I dabbled in Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for Super Nintendo. They did have a port for NES, but I thought it was just so cool to see the turtles in their own dedicated fighting game.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there was new characters from the comics. There was also a few original characters they added. I didn't know how to play Street Fighter back then, like actually like how it was supposed to work. So I when I played that game, I was super crap at it, but it was still fun to mess around with. And they did make like a Smash Brothers style Turtles game that was based off the TMNT movie
Mhm.
somewhere in the 2000s, and I did dabble with a little bit of that. That one didn't really play that great, and I played it on the Wii. It was really rough, but it did have a lot of characters in it. And then special mention to the cameo of the Ninja Turtles being in Injustice 2 as a DLC fighter. And it wasn't the best implementation. They basically made one turtle with kind of a semi-generic moveset, and because the
Mm.
gear system allowed you to put different weapons on characters or swap out some movesets, what they did was you have one slot for the turtles, and then you just equip each type of weapon, and that's how you got that turtle. And so they'd have some slightly different
Okay.
special moves. They'd share some special moves, have some of their own unique ones or unique effects. Their assist would change a little bit, and then their super special involved all four turtles coming in and doing a shell shock, which was actually pretty rad.
That's
So
cool.
that's where I am right now, and I haven't really played any other Turtles games or handhelds, and I've played a bunch of other games at this point, so I have an idea of what I'd want to do. I don't know if it's the most fun, but I think it would be the most faithful and interesting, and kind of lead towards what we haven't seen, which is kind of exploring the Turtles more as the characters they are, rather than just being straight up action stars. So that's why we wanted to get together for this episode was talk about like what we want what we'd want is like a dream game for turtles. So Paul, I know you told me you have like a really clear vision because you've thought about this a lot. So you start and tell me about, what is the super fans dream Ninja Turtle game?
All right. Yeah. Well, first, before I get into it, I will say, since this is a fantasy, you know, I'm going to do this. I'm sure you are too. Just going to ignore any potential licensing, copyright stuff. That's like, well, we might not be able to do this in the game because of copyright, whatever. It's fantasy, so we'll go all out with
Absolutely.
what the game is going to be. So, what I would like to see is an RPG because, as you mentioned earlier, pretty much all the Turtles games, or at least most of them, or the more popular ones, have been beat 'em ups, which is fine. I've enjoyed them. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it would be cool to get a full, awesome RPG Turtles game and really explore the different characters. So I mentioned earlier the game I'm playing on my phone, TMNT Legends.
Okay.
That is an RPG, but it's a classic phone game. You know what I mean? It's like, you play, oh, you fight this, and then you get like X amount of points that you could put towards getting another player, and then, but you could only use that a certain amount. Otherwise, you could buy this and that. You know how phone games go.
Yeah.
Um, so what I would like to do is have it be more of a fully fledged RPG, open world type RPG. This is especially coming off of my love for Super Mario RPG, as you know, which for the time especially, that was kind of open worldish. You kind of explored. You didn't really have like a set path to go. So that's kind of what I'd like to see with this. So anyway, to start off, what I would have is, so this is going to be also, let me say, the TMNT Legends game I'm playing is based exclusively off the 2012 cartoon.
Okay.
So all the characters are around that. So this, what I would make would be just something new. So like new style animation, but it would include, it would encompass characters from every Turtles universe. So again,
Hmm.
since this is fantasy, we don't have to worry about copyright or whether we're able to license something. So this is going to incorporate pretty much as many turtle characters as we can think of. So I have the plan for the way this game starts is going to be, you have a little intro movie series with the turtles training down in the sewer lair with Splinter, April, and Casey. So you have all them together training. You have some fun banter with the little movie intro, whatever.
Hmm.
And then you get some rumblings, and mousers break into the lair and they chew through stuff, and kind of part of the lair collapses. So you have half the group divided. So you've got one group with Splinter, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and April, we'll say.
Hmm.
And then you have the other group is Raphael, Donatello, Casey Jones, and somebody else we'll get to. At this point, it's just the three of them.
Hmm.
So we start our story with the first group with the Splinter, Leonardo, April, and Michelangelo group. And they're going to fight through the sewers against groups of mousers. So it's kind of like any other RPG game where you start with, pretty basic enemies. So the mousers are going to be pretty simple, and we'll do where they have a certain amount of hit points. The turtle characters have a certain amount of hit points, things like that.
Hmm.
And so now it'll be playable in a group of four. So kind of similar to, I don't know, I guess Final Fantasy, would that be? Where you have a party of four, whatever you want to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have your hit points, and of course, you build up as you go along. You could accrue more hit points, you could level up, stuff like that.
Hmm.
Each character would also have unique stats, I guess. So, for example, Raphael would be very strong. He's a strong character, so he would have a lot of power. Donatello would be very technical, so he'd be kind of more defensive. Splinter, I guess, would be kind of more of a smart character, maybe like a healer type character. April would be kind of like a support type character, things like that, and I guess that would be what Casey would be as well. So anyway, you know what I mean. So each character would have their own thing. Michelangelo would be fast; he'd be kind of like a dodgy character, and they would of course have special moves and things like that. Anyway, so you play through the first level, if that's the right word to call it, because like I said, I would like it to be more open world. So it's not necessarily just going through the sewers and like, here you fight this mouser and then you take a couple steps forward and here's another mouser and blah blah blah. So you're kind of exploring through the sewers, and you might happen to come across some mousers or other enemies, whatever they might
Sure.
be. But like I
Uh,
said, this first part would be very basic, just kind of to get you used to the characters, used to the play of the game, things like that, used to how the hit points work and the specials work and all that stuff. And then we come to the end of the level, or the end of the sewers. They're about to escape and come up from the sewers, and they would end up fighting Baxter Stockman, of course. However, he could be he could be inside of a giant mouser, let's say, controlling that, and maybe throwing out smaller mousers, which I think is kind of, that might be what happens in the second game where he throws out the smaller mousers. So that's how that would go. Then once that kind of portion is completed, you would transfer over to the other group, the Raphael, Casey Jones, Donatello group. So now they're stuck in this other part where it collapsed, and they are going to meet up initially with Leatherhead, who's also in the sewers. Because in the 2012 cartoon, he's lives in the sewers as well. So we're going to kind of go off that.
okay.
So they're going to meet up with him, and unlike, they're not going to fight Mousers. So the Mousers were kind of on that other side. So that group got trapped with the Mousers. So this crew is going to fight Krang robots. So again, we're going to kind of go with the 2012 mentality where there's like the Krang where they're bad guys. In the 2012 cartoon, Leatherhead was like sworn enemies of them. So what we're going to have is they're going to try to kind of escape through the sewers. They're going to find Leatherhead fighting off a bunch of Krang robots, and they're going to try to help him. So that's where we kind of start with this group is they're going to fight off Krang robots. Again, pretty easy. We're still in the early stages of this game. We're still in the getting used to it portion. So that's how that's going to go. But as we go along, so now we progress. So, we go back, for example, to that Leonardo group. Once they beat Baxter Stockman, they get out of the sewer. Now they're above ground. They're up to the streets. So now you start fighting maybe a little bit more advanced enemies. So let's say now you're on the streets, you start encountering purple dragons. You're fighting purple dragons, and then maybe the end boss of that area is Hun or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And et cetera, et cetera. We go on as we go through the game. You fight in different areas, and you fight different groups. And as you go along, you get harder and harder and more. Eventually, maybe you run into Bebop and Rocksteady. You run into Slash. You run into whoever it might be. Eventually, they'll meet up with that second crew. And so, what I would want is the ability to play as pretty much anybody. So you could swap us. You don't necessarily. So initially, you're stuck playing as whoever Leonardo, April, Splinter, and Michelangelo. But eventually, my thought would be kind of as you beat characters, you could also play as them if you would like to. Just because I
Okay.
think it would be really cool to play as these different characters. So let's say you beat Hun after the Purple Dragons area. Now you could have Hun in you kind of recruit Hun into your group, and you
Okay.
could play as him, and he has certain abilities. So maybe he works well with certain characters. And then like I said, once they meet up with that Raphael crew, you could play as any of them, swap any of them out. So going back to Super Mario RPG,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of similar to that where like you could be Mario, Peach, and Bowser, or you could be at one of the other characters, Mallow, for example, or something like that. Replace him with Peach or something like that. So I kind of want that idea where like you're not necessarily stuck to specific characters. Like I really just want to explore the Turtles world with this. In addition to just being an RPG, I do want to give it some story. So like I mentioned with the initial scene where the Mousers break in, I want to have a lot of cutscenes like that throughout. So like when you fight the purple dragons, like I want to have cutscenes. Like, when you encounter Hun, I want to have a cutscene with that. I want to actually give it some story, so it's not just like you're just constantly just fighting and fighting and fighting for no apparent reason. I want to
Oh,
maybe give it
sure.
some backstory, like maybe the purple dragons were terrorizing the city, or maybe they're holding Angel captive. If you remember, she was a big part of the 2003 cartoon. And things like that. And like I said, Leatherhead, give him a story where he's been fighting with those Krang bots, whatever it might be. So, yeah, so that's pretty much my idea. And I would say probably the final end goal would be Shredder, because I think that makes the most sense to have Shredder be the final
Okay.
boss. He's Shredder, so
Yeah.
I think that would be my end goal for the final boss. Whether maybe even Super Shredder. Maybe you encounter regular Shredder at some point and you defeat him, and then as you go through the game, you eventually he turns into Super Shredder. So now your final boss is going to be this crazy version of Shredder or whatever. But yeah, so that's pretty much my idea. I hope it's lived up to what you were thinking it would be. But yeah, so pretty much I would just I want an RPG game. I guess my three factors would be: one, I want an RPG game as opposed to beat 'em up. Two, I want a game that has some story. So I want a cutscene or multiple cutscenes. I want to give the characters some backstory. I want to give their motivation some backstory. And three, I want to be able to play as all of these different characters from the Ninja Turtles universe. So those were kind of the three factors that I looked at when coming up with my ideas for a game.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
so
like
that
that.
that's what I got, at least for some just kind of a general fantasy of what I want to see from a Ninja Turtles game. So, what
That's
about
all.
you? I'm curious to see what you've got.
Well, before that, I do want to ask you some questions just to see how you flesh out the idea and then to get some more clarification. So when you say an RPG, did you want it to be turn-based, kind of like how Super Mario RPG is, or did you envision some of the more modern games where it's action RPG and you're in full control of the character during combat?
I'm a much bigger fan of turn-based RPG, so I
Okay.
would prefer that. But doing it in a more modern way, of course. We've advanced since the Super Mario RPG days, so it doesn't need to necessarily look like that. But yeah, I if I'm doing an RPG, I would like it to be turn-based. That's just me.
That's fine. There are some modern turn-based RPGs, and they can look really good. The Persona series continues to pursue strict turn-based, as well as Dragon Quest. So it's definitely got an audience there, and I think that might actually be a better balance for the way you want to incorporate all these different TMNT characters, and basically how you would do that towards the end, especially with you acquiring them via the the contrivances of the plot. So that's the next thing is with the plot, is there a specific story thread that you remember from either the cartoons or the comics that you'd want to either replicate or adapt, or is there like pieces of from those stories that are your favorites that you'd want to put in there and what you want something mostly new, or do you have an idea of like what you want the story to be about?
Yeah, I would like to have it be kind of pieces of stuff because, like I said, I really want to incorporate as many Ninja Turtle universes as possible. So
Hmm.
I would like to kind of incorporate pieces of my favorite stuff. So the perfect example, like I mentioned, Leatherhead is a great character. He's always around, but he's much different in the '87 cartoon. He's a bad guy.
Hmm.
If you remember, he has that kind of like Louisiana type thing, like he
Oh
or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever. And then in the 2003 cartoon, he's like a scientist, and I believe, if I remember correctly, he's kind of like imbalanced, like he'll go crazy at times.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then in the 2012 cartoon, he's a good guy as well, and he also has like anger management issues because he was like held
Yeah.
captive and tortured by the Krang. He ends up being friends with the turtles, and they work together a lot. So for an example, as far as taking pieces of things goes, I really love that version of Leatherhead, that 2012 version. So my Leatherhead storyline would be more on par with the way that they portrayed him in the 2012 cartoon. But that's how it would go for every character. You know what I mean? So another character, I might like him better in the '87 cartoon, so I might take a piece of that storyline. Another character I might like from the movie, one of the original movies, so I might take a piece from that. So my dream game would incorporate pieces of all of the universes, what I would feel were the best or my personal favorites, and work those into the storyline.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, and I was curious because I wondered if for you you'd have the same kind of rule as I would, because I think you can't really have a Ninja Turtle game without co-op. I mean, you can. It's totally possible, but it's one of those things where I think people expect that, and that's part of the fun is not only the story of the turtles working together, but then trying to replicate that relationship because you get your friends together or your siblings, and everyone takes a turtle and everyone's got their favorite turtle or favorite character in general and then gets to play that and you team up and work together. So I think the RPG thing will definitely have that aspect inside the story for one person to experience, which I'm not against. I'm a huge RPG fan, a single player RPG fan, so no problem there. But I was very surprised when you said like didn't mention there'd be any co-op, like you just want the single player RPG. But that makes a lot of sense with how story driven the turtles can be. And I think that with that concept, it makes perfect sense to pursue a single player RPG.
Yeah, and I do love the co-op aspect. Like I said, one of the reasons why I didn't love the original game was because it was only one player, and the following games were multiplayer, which was really fun. But yeah, I was really into the idea of fantasizing about an RPG. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe there are some ways you could make that into a multiplayer, with online, maybe like, you could do a four-player where each person, like I said, I'd like it to be a party of four. Maybe each person has a character or a place in the party or something. So, there probably are ways that you can do it if you did want it to be multiplayer.
True. I mean, this is your vision we're talking about. So I'm just talking about my surprise that like co-op wasn't part of the vision. Not that you couldn't obviously change your mind or anything like that. It's just my initial impressions. And I think your game sounds great, and I would definitely love to play it and try it as a TMNT fan. I would be very curious to see how it fleshed out. Do you have a preference for like the art style you'd want to go for? I think you mentioned you wanted the 2013 cartoon. Is that correct?
I think I'd go for a totally new art style if possible. Kind of like you showed me that game you were talking about earlier,
Hmm.
where you loved that type of art style. I would want to do something like that where it's kind of different from what we've seen in the past. Maybe it could incorporate a little bit from 2012 or 2003 or whatever. I really loved the 2003 animation.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, if possible, I would try nothing too crazy. I don't want to give it a whole new look where like, oh my god, the turtles look totally different. But
not quite
I
Rise.
yeah, but I think it would be nice to give it its own look, like unique to that particular video game.
It's also funny that you bring that up. Not that I think there is like a one or two Rise games out there, either mobile or cheap licensed games. But the turtles end up getting like magical weapons, which does lend to the RPG aspect of diversifying their abilities and move sets. And Donatello shows off a bunch of wacky and crazy gadgets, which I think you'll eventually appreciate. And I was kind of saving this for, and I meant to both ask it earlier and then decided to save it for our kind of like post discussion. Was Donatello is your favorite turtle?
Yes.
Leonardo is my favorite turtle, and we have our reasons for that. But Donatello is definitely probably one of the most interesting turtles because he's the genius. He builds all these gadgets, and he can have the most diverse ability set.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you could do a lot as far as an RPG game goes. I think he would be one of the coolest characters because you could do so much with him. Like ranking. This is one thing I see on the Facebook discussions a lot is Facebook group discussions is like who's the best fighter, who's the worst fighter, all that stuff. I mean, realistically, Donatello is probably the worst fighter, but he makes up for it because he's so smart and he's so technical and he could, adapt and he could build all this cool stuff. So, looking at it from like an RPG standpoint, his power or his like fighting ability or whatever stat you wanted to call it would probably not be very good. But you could do so many cool like special moves and different things with him that I think he would be a really fun character to play with.
Yeah, and my impression of Donatello has always been he's just not as confident as he needs to be, and all of them have suffered from confidence issues. But
Hmm.
his hand to hand seems kind of the weakest. But I mean, he's gone through pretty much all the same training as the turtles, and it's never been really called out that he's anywhere weaker. Michelangelo actually honestly seems weaker than him because Michelangelo goofs around so much and kind of,
Yeah.
at least the way they illustrate it, sometimes he kind of lucks into a lot of good moves. Not that they aren't all capable in their own way, but I would say Donatello, he lacks confidence because in the physical attributes because he enjoys his machines more. But I think he definitely has the potential to be the strongest of the turtles if he just had a little more confidence in general. I think he could even replace Leonardo as the leader. And as we are aware of in the Rise, I'm sorry, I just remember I'd seen the end, but of Rise, and I don't want to spoil that twist for you. But at the start of Rise, Raphael is the leader of Turtles, and that's a departure because Leonardo is typically that, and Leonardo's
Yeah.
kind of now is kind of the number two man to Raph as much more of like a lovable meathead. I believe he has less anger issues than this. He's just kind of more of a lovable
All right.
meathead in that. So there's the departure there. But also your idea of splitting up the groups and things, I think that helps create like these new dynamics, and that's the other part is exploring those dynamics. That could be really interesting for a Turtles game. And that's kind of what we're talking about here is that Turtles games never really explore the personalities as well as any of the other mediums, which is
Yeah.
pretty much the heart of the series.
Hmm.
So it's a really missed opportunity, and I think your idea would be quite fascinating. And so yeah, for the art style, would you want something more edgy? I know you said the 2003, or would you also want something more towards like maybe the classic style with like the round, more soft rounded turtle shells and things like that, or would you want? Do you have any thoughts about like your favorite, your preferred art styles or art elements? Like, do you have a favorite shell style or bandana style from any of the various media?
I do. Yeah. I like I said, I love the 2003 style, so it would probably be closest to that.
Hmm.
Which, like you said, I guess it's a little bit more edgy. It's a little more dark.
Yeah.
If I remember, the turtles had like the white eyes, or
Yep.
maybe that was just when they got angry.
They have the white eyes most of the time, but then there's times where they take the masks off and they'll have pupils.
Yeah, I
Like a
like that
Batman
art
thing.
style.
Yeah.
And the bandanas. Yeah, I like everything about that. I There is something I like about the '87. I'm still a big fan of like the hand drawn old school animation.
Mhm.
I don't know if it necessarily holds up these days, but it was cool. You know, it was hand drawn. It was unique. It was different. But yeah, if I had to pick an art style to most closely resemble, or a bandana style, or a turtles look style, whatever you want to say, it would be that 2003 cartoon. I really love the look of
Mhm.
everything in that one.
I agree with you, and that look was really good. And then later on, and you can definitely see this in the crossover movie, at some point they kind of changed the art style and made more simpler shapes to the turtles because probably for budgetary reasons.
Hmm.
But it did lose some of that charm because it's like I could tell from the previous seasons. And fast forward like went full hardcore into it because they went for a totally different like sci-fi aesthetic
Yeah.
and a much more Saturday morning cartoon, easy to produce style in my opinion. So it's always funny when I see that because I remember distinctly, and I can't remember when, but like the 1987 the original cartoon. I think we're getting the years wrong, but the original cartoon, I remember distinctly there was like it might have just been the intro in my perception, but I thought there was like a hard cut at some point where they changed the art style from being as lighthearted and went to a slightly more darker style in like the second half of the series. And I can't remember that, but in my brain it sticks out. And I think a lot of the other like shows have done that because I remember a similar thing for like Ghostbusters. I feel like they did like this mid-season art shift for whatever reason, but it could also be my nostalgic memory just kind of messing up. So yeah, was there anything else about your vision of the game that you wanted to share?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think I got pretty much everything in there. Like you mentioned earlier, exploring the storylines or backstories or whatever the characters, that would be big because we haven't really got that in a Turtles game. Because, well, and part of the reason is a lot of times you don't in beat 'em ups, especially Nintendo, Super Nintendo. You know, you didn't really have that many full fledged stories back then. But yeah, I mean, I would be, these days, the type of games that I really get into, or that I think are interesting to play, or that I get hooked on, are ones that have really good character stories. You know, me and you are both big fans of the Resident Evil games. Those have always had great stories to them.
Decent. They're schlocky B movie, but they're good
But
schlocky
they're
B
good
movie.
story. Yeah, exactly. So I would want something like that where you can really get an idea of like, wow, I'm invested in this character. Like, not only do I want to play as them because I think they're cool or they have cool moves, but I'm really invested in them. I want to, you know, I'm behind the story. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So my vision for the a Ninja Turtle game isn't quite as fleshed out as yours, but I've always had this idea in the back of the head after I played Batman Arkham Asylum. And then more recently I just started playing the Avengers video game that came out from Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix, and Crystal Dynamics made the newer Tomb Raider reboot series. So what I want the series what I want my game to do is more accurately explore the various ways the turtles can interact with their world. I want more of the ninja stealth aspect to be able there to really take advantage of the turtles acting like ninjas as well as their diverse weapon styles. But also I'd want to take more advantage of Donatello and his repertoire of gadgets and him helping his brothers through gadgets and things like that. And I think my game would focus more on the four turtles while having other characters. Now, have you played the Batman Arkham games? Any of them?
I have not. I've always heard that they're amazing and incredible and all that stuff, but no, I cannot say that I've played them.
Okay, so to flesh that out, they're full 3D action games. Arkham Asylum is much more of like a structured, the colloquial term for video games would be Metroidvania, but I would also I describe it as labyrinthine. It's you're in pretty much like set piece environments. They're not super huge like open world. They're like exploratory spaces, kind of like in Resident Evil, how you have like the mansion or the police station, and you can move around and you get used to that area, and then you kind of progress as you unlock things. So it's almost like stages, but it'd be more free form. So I think a good portion of our audience will be familiar with how Batman Arkham Asylum works, and that's the first game. Arkham City ended up being like full open world with a few areas that were more enclosed and structured. But based on how I'd want this to go, because I would want this to be strongly narrative focused, I do want to hone it in and make it more of these structured, catered environments with more puzzle solving, with combat elements interspersed, because I want the turtles to be able to flex more of their individual personality traits through the gameplay and have challenges tailored to that on top of having normal combat for some of that. So I would like them to be able to stealth around and have to investigate things. I'd like Donatello to have to like hack stuff or use gadgets.
That's cool.
And while Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Raphael are much more straightforward and combat oriented, there could be missions where they go solo and have to do investigations. So I would want to have there be like a main mystery, and I'm envisioning the game kind of in 3 acts because I want to incorporate the different aspects of the Turtles universe, which have not only the Foot Clan and the Purple Dragons being like these very human threats, and of course the Shredder kind of goes a little further than just a human threat, but for the most part, at least always in the introductions, he's focused as this much more human threat, but he is the strongest human threat that the Turtles ever face. And then there's the alien and space and the multiverse sections, and I kind of want to play with those as well and have like this 3 act mystery that explores all these different things and kind of gives this much more fleshed out tale and adventure for the turtles to go through. While the open world, because I also recently played Ghost of Tsushima, which is takes place in like a fantasized ancient Japan, and you get to do like the samurai open world stuff, and it's actually really fun. So it's not that I couldn't see an open world version of the game, but I think I want something a little more structured, like the Batman games or the newer God of War game that came out on PS4, and some of those more structured adventure games,
Okay.
just to deliver the story better and also have all these tailored challenges. So with the combat, like most of the games being beat 'em ups in the past, that's the one thing where yeah, all the turtles can beat up guys. They've all had ninja training, and this may not be the most fun, but what I'd really like to see is each of the turtles has to play some sort of a role, not just in the terms of combat, like you were pointing out with the characters in yours, where they'd have like these traditional RPG roles and they'd have different support skills and things like that. But it would be more like, what does each character need to be doing in this combat encounter? So maybe Donatello needs to be hacking the door. So the other three need to be taking advantage or need to be defending Donatello while he's hacking the door or doing something remotely. Or maybe the teams need to split up and the story will dictate how they split up. And each one's kind of accomplishing different missions in order to work together and they have to do different stuff. But then each turtle could interact in the environment in a different way. So like Michelangelo's a lot more wild, so he could like swing around, he could bounce off walls, he'd use his skateboard and do like acrobatic tricks, and maybe he's better at like stunning and distracting the enemy, whereas like Raph and Leo are much better at straightforward head-on fighting, and they would have like combo moves that they could do together. And that was something also Mutant in Manhattan did, is that the characters could actually actively combo and do like tag team attacks with each other, or you could even power up meter, I think, and do like the 4 turtle team up attack. And so once again, there are cool elements
Hmm.
to that game. It's sadly very flawed. But I'd like to see that where each of the turtles are kind of doing roles in certain encounters and might not have
I
to do
like
that.
that. Yeah.
But then also we could bring in Casey Jones and April, and that could be things where you could play as April and she's exploring stuff. Also, the new Spider-Man game that was on PS4 also gave me a lot of ideas of you could have a fully fleshed out New York City, and he does go into some structured environments, but not nearly as much. It's mostly in these open world, and it leads to usually some kind of boring environment variety. But I would like some of the areas would be the turtles moving through a cityscape and maybe avoiding Foot Clan and Purple Dragons, or like snooping on them and they have to sneak around. And I wouldn't want it to be hardcore stealth for every section. I'd want there to be a lot of like room for error. So it's like, oh, if you mess up, you have like a really short window to take out like a Purple Dragon or Foot Soldier clan member so he doesn't alert the others, but it would still not be like zero tolerance. Like, oh, it's spotted, it's done. And if I did any of that, it'd be really short, really easy to get through. Or very straightforward to get through, because those sections can be really fun and it's not really flexing any creativity, or at least give the turtles like options for saving themselves from that if they need to stay in stealth. So I'd really like to play more on those ninja parts of the gameplay as well as combat and do some more investigative stuff, and the turtles having to like figure out things and go back to the base and go through New York and these different sections. And so that's pretty much how I'd want the gameplay. I would love to try and do co-op in it, and I think it was Arkham. I think Arkham Knight actually has. Well, I think it has a multiplayer mode, but I think it has some co-op fights in the campaign. But I think most of it's like in a sideline multiplayer mode. And I think Arkham City also had it too. I forget because it's been so long since I played, and I really didn't play those multiplayer modes. But there's
Yeah.
also the newer game coming out called Gotham Knight that's going to have full co-op with environments and stuff like that. And then I just recently been playing the Marvel's Avengers games, like I said, and that's actually been doing really well. Really impressed me in the way it has co-op multiplayer in the game. Now it is mostly like a Diablo style RPG looter beat 'em up. So I wouldn't want the looting aspect of it. I'd rather have the turtles just have specific skills and kind of give the turtles more skills as they go through the
I
story
like
as
that
it
idea.
dictates.
Yeah, I
So it's
agree.
much more structured, but then give the player and the turtles ways to be more creative with their skills to interact with the environment, to get through combat encounters and to get through challenges on top of having challenges that require specific solutions. I'm a fan of video game puzzles. It's part of why I also love Resident Evil is because of the way it does its puzzles, even though a lot of them aren't super sophisticated. And I'm not looking for super sophisticated puzzles, but just things that make more sense. And I could go to the series and look around how they have to do this. Maybe the turtles have to be in disguise in certain aspects, and it's always fun when they pull out the trench coats and be like, "Hey, no one in New York's going to notice a turtle in a trench coat. Everyone does. Nobody in New York cares." And I love that conceit as well. Or when the turtles do things. So my 3 act structure. The first one would be the turtles are going through their normal routine, purple dragons causing mischief, something seems to be happening with the Foot Clan. But there'd also be other events going on that would lead to the bigger part of the story. And so it kind of red herrings the turtles into believing either the purple dragons or the Foot Clan are up to no good. But also the the Foot Clan and the Purple Dragons, if I'm correct, like the Purple Dragons are like semi-controlled by the Foot Clan. Isn't that correct? Or do they just have like a good partnership as like a criminal partnership?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on like which universe, which iteration it is. But yeah,
Mm,
most of the
okay.
time it's just that like yeah, they have like a good partnership. They work together, stuff like that.
Yeah. The Purple Dragon are more like the face of the Foot Clan. The public face, and the Foot Clan are supposed to be more of the shadowy organization. But either way, so they would actually be investigating something going on in the city themselves because it's interrupting, their criminal empire. And then the turtles would be catching on to their activities, but not really understanding what's going on. And so they'd slowly be unraveling that something bigger is going on, and then the purple dragons and the Foot Clan don't like the turtles. It would all be already be established that the turtles are in the city, and they usually stop the Foot Clan and the purple dragons from doing a lot of their criminal activity. So they already have that antagonistic relationship, and in the middle, and then this would be like this whole big misunderstanding where they would almost be like, oh my god, now the turtles are getting involved, and this is even worse, and this is already happening, and there'd be you could even have Karai going like, "This isn't us," and maybe she has to appear and be like the voice of reason, whereas like, clearly the Shredder's doing something he's just not telling you, and Karai would be like, "That's completely not true. I'm the second hand of the Shredder. He would absolutely tell me, and he's actually really pissed about what's going on in the city right now." And that would then lead to getting into something more fantastic. So maybe like Utroms or the Triceratrons, and maybe we or some other faction that might be from the multiverse rather than from the alien side. I don't really want to do time travel. I want to try to avoid that to make things simpler. But you can still do stuff with multidimension. And I want to be able to get out of just the New York City environment in the sewers. I want to be able to explore different environments and give the turtles the chance to go through different parts. So this is where I'd like the second act, and there would be like you'd fight the Shredder in the first act as his as the climax of the first act, and you defeat him. But then part of this would be where like the threat then escalates as something else happens. Like you have that big face off because there was a red herring from whoever the secret faction is, and they would end up causing like a huge disruption, and suddenly like the turtles will get separated from Shredder and the Foot Clan stuff, and they'll be in a new environment, whether that's like an alien world or another part of Earth or something like that. Because I want it to also get them into different places. Whether they'd be together or not, I'd have to think about the story more. But maybe for now they would still be together, and you'd have them now in this new environment, and each one would have to kind of accomplish missions and stuff, and they'd be like, oh man, like April and Casey, because Casey would be a playable character, but he'd be much more of a brute, and so he would jump in and do like straightforward fights. But he would have to also like pair up with some characters, and I think I like your idea too, where you have these unconventional pairings. So maybe they do get split up at some point, and they have to work together, figure out their new strengths, and kind of grow as a little bit as characters and get outside their niches, and then find a way to come back together. So whatever would happen with multidimensional or alien thing, like they're experimenting with Earth for some contrived reason, of course, and it would cause the turtles to be in new environments because I want them to be in like be able to go into like jungles or like fantasy areas and be able to interact with people that they haven't interacted with before or beings because it can be the different mutations in animals and things like that, and you'd have to stealth around and explore these different areas. And then by the climax of the second act, you'd learn what's actually going on and why this is happening and why it's a danger to both Earth and space and
Okay.
etc. And so the turtles want to get home and save everything. So then the third act would be everyone trying to reunite, get back together, and figure out a way to stop the actual faction, the actual whatever the faction would be. I'm not familiar enough to really confidently state I want this faction to be. It could even be a new faction that's just like a mix of other things. And maybe even going multiverse. Maybe I'll do it where like it's like a crazy thing where I'll have a semi-evil Donatello who's trying to like fix things in space time. It was one of his experiments that went wrong, and maybe something like that. And then the turtles be like, oh no, and because Donatello has in some arcs created like giant robots in the future to like fight evil things. I know in the 2003 cartoon that really sad, really dark future episode where he was in the robot thing and like everyone ended up dying because I think it was
Yeah.
like him and April were fighting and Leo was completely blind or something like that. I forget if it was Leo or Raph, but it was yeah, something like that where Donatello's trying to it's one of the turtles or one of the characters trying to fix everything. So it's almost like the way you're trying to fix everything is actually breaking everything and we have to stop you to correct it. So it'd be like this bittersweet story. Or maybe it'd just be a little more lighthearted with something evil at that point, who's just like, I'm trying to take control of the universe, and you guys are just in my
Classic.
way. But there'd be all the other stuff there. I'd want it to be a little more emotionally deep because the turtles have slowly been doing that, and as we've gotten older, it's just more interesting to have those complex emotional things and have the turtles deal with tough things, but there still being like a more clear moral thread to like look, you have good intentions, but you're clearly going about it the wrong way, which is usually the best modern way to handle a complex story that you still want people to walk away feeling good about
Yeah,
for a
I
Turtles
agree.
adventure. So I'd want it to be like that and continue to have the Turtles explore their move sets a bit more as like characters and things like that. And maybe in the fights and stuff, each one has to take turns trying to do like managing a device thing so everyone's you're still fighting through and cycling through and everyone's trying to do specific roles. So maybe instead of everyone wailing on a boss, it's like, hey, you need to try to restrain this robot's legs, and I'm gonna get on its back to rip out its power source, while Donnie's over on the computer trying to disrupt its signals that it's doing this for shields. Like, and so each of the turtles have their own skill sets and tools that they all have to work together in combat, but not necessarily just straight up wailing on a character in order to accomplish the fight. And I think that could also be better accomplished in co-op, but there's also games where switching between the characters and you set them in motion and then you can just freely hop between them could also do that. And maybe you could do blend that together so there could be online co-op. But that's kind of where I would be. It wouldn't be an RPG. It'd be more of like an action game. Like the story dictates what skills you get. Maybe there's some like bonus cosmetics and things for like different armors and stuff like that the turtles can wear, and maybe they'd get like some armor updates. In terms of like art style, I would definitely try to lean more towards that unique anime aesthetic that I saw in Mutants in Manhattan, but I definitely want to still, in order to make it appeal to people who are fans of the show, I definitely try to borrow from an existing art style, and I think I'd lean more towards actually what the IDW comics are kind of looking at right now, where it's like gritty, but it's got those proportions from the 2003 cartoon.
Yeah, those
Um,
that style looks good. Yeah.
so I think I'd find some sort of like artistic hybrid between that, which is kind of also what Mutants at Manhattan did, but it had a much more anime influence there, and be able to have the characters express themselves more in gameplay from the puzzle solving and ninja aspect. So that's basically what I'd like to see as a dream game.
Sounds pretty awesome. I like the idea of the three different acts, and I especially like the idea of the turtles having different skill sets and maybe having to use them, like you said, on a boss, for example. This turtle has to do this. This turtle has to do this because, thinking about it, at least with those early games, like we talked about, the turtles never really had different skill sets. Like their differences were more in just like weapons. Like well,
Right.
Donatello's got like a bow staff, so he has a longer reach, or Michelangelo doesn't have quite as long a reach, whatever it might be. Obviously in the shows, they definitely have unique skills and unique skill sets. So I think that's a really cool concept to explore in a video game. I especially love the idea of like Donatello's got to hack into the computer while the other turtles do this, or they're fighting a boss and this guy's got to take out his legs while the other one does this. And I think that would be a really unique and cool concept for a Turtles game.
Yeah, thanks. And
I
they have
Oh no, go ahead.
experimented with different tools and weapons throughout the different series in various capacities. They always come back to like their basic weapons, but Donatello's always creating gadgets and devices for whatever the situation is. So it'd be like Donatello can create some sort of techno gadget for himself. I'm not really sure what, but he'd be able to create a few different things, and then there'd be plot related devices. Give one of the turtles like a grappling hook, so that way they're able to get around in certain ways. And I'm thinking like for Michelangelo, so he could do like more specific tricks with like a skateboard, and he would have a skateboard that he could use in different ways. And maybe it's slightly modded, or if Donatello mods it so it has rockets later, and he can do like weird hoverboard stuff. I'm trying to think for Raphael and Leonardo, what kind of like type of gadget would be suitable for them. So maybe like one of them has kunai, that so they have like a throwing weapon like that. But I'm also trying to think of like other like tools and stuff that really would be useful for them, for allowing them to interact more with the environment. But that's the kind of thing, like they get this secondary tool item that would be more unique to them, so they could complement better. And of course, like same thing with Casey and April. Like I would see April more as like an investigative character, so she does a lot more of like puzzle solving and investigating with the turtles, and maybe she'd have some combat later on once they get further into the adventure and things like the second act and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if she has like a signature weapon in the series, or if she just kind of learns some martial arts and then just kind of mix it up as necessary. Obviously, Casey Jones with his hockey stick, plus like if the movie's any representation, the original movie's any representation, his bag of bludgeoning weapons. Um,
Classic.
maybe he has to learn to use some other weapons, or maybe he has to use his brain more, and that's something where it starts off very brawn based, kind of like him and Raphael, but then he has to learn some other techniques still along the way to be a much more unique and diverse character. And he's most of the times I believe he's been portrayed more as like the doofiest. I don't think I have Master Splinter playable. I think Master Splinter would stay there as like a he might be like someone that has to get rescued in the mission, and he'd like be he'd be like an NPC that teams up every once in a while. But I think
Okay.
my reverence for Splinter is that he would still kind of be like on the side. He wouldn't actually be playable because it just seems like a weird thing. But who knows? Maybe I'd even have like an evil Master Splinter, and you have to fight him. But I'd give him like armor and stuff, so it's really hard. Like they don't actually hurt him. Like give their like a plot reason. Like it's really difficult for him to hurt. Besides, like
Yeah.
that's a really cool thing. Like Master Splinter's always like he's the teacher. He's he usually when he does fight, they show that he is just super actually skillful
Yeah.
and nimble and talented, and he could beat the Shredder, and really the only reason he can't is because he's just older, and the Shredder also cheats. So I think that
Yeah,
would also
they.
be
No,
well,
sorry, I was just gonna say you could do an
yeah.
evil Master Splinter thing because they've dabbled with that a little bit with like the Rat King,
Hmm.
as far as like him being able to kind of control Splinter. So like he is evil, but like he doesn't want to be, but it's like out of
Yeah.
his control. So that's definitely an interesting way that you can go about something like that.
Yeah, and if I do like the multiverse angle plus the alien dimension or alien worlds thing, that could always have like maybe it's not a master. It could, oh yeah, it could be an alternate dimension tale because if I'm talking about
Hmm.
the evil Donatello, then maybe it's a evil or alternate version of a Master Splinter where he was like he's younger and then he realizes he has to stop Donatello or something, like something
Yeah,
happened,
that's cool.
mutagen, like there was a mutagen accident. I was able to turn younger and Donatello like murdered all his brothers and I have to stop him or something like that. And but like you guys are in the way, like mistakes them for his turtles or something like that. There's a number of ways that you can make that interesting where the characters have to interact.
Yeah.
um yeah, I don't think I'd do. I mean, maybe a sequence where Master Splinter is like there and he's just the craziest cool character. Because I'm also thinking like, oh, like even in Kingdom Hearts 2, and I'm a big Kingdom Hearts fan, as I believe I've mentioned on previous episodes. When you get KO'd for the first time, instead of going straight to game over, it gives you an option to be like, do you give up or do you want to continue? And when you continue, Mickey Mouse leaps in and you can fight as Mickey Mouse to build up energy to then revive Sora. So it's like,
That's cool.
oh, like maybe I have like one or two sequences where you get to play as Master Splinter and he's just OP and you just get to experience being OP Master Splinter for whatever reason. Because if I do the
Hmm.
multiverse or space thing, I can always do magic or sci-fi reasons for making Master Splinter, like even more powerful just for those few moments and things
Right.
to do all that stuff. So yeah,
Ooh,
that's my main
cool.
focus. Is I really just want the game to actually show off more of the dynamic gameplay aspects of the turtles, really shine their personalities, and focus less on beat 'em up and more of an adventure for the characters.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Sounds really cool. And I would say I think you covered just about everything. So I only have one question. My question would be in the third act, once they find out that it's this evil, other entity, whatever
Yeah,
that
who's
entity
truly
ends up
behind
being.
everything?
Yeah, once they find that out and they realize it's kind of a threat to everybody, in the third act, would you have the Turtles teaming up with the Foot Clan and with Shredder and with the Purple Dragons or whoever, like people that are normally evil? Would you have them teaming up, like kind of for the greater good, for the like, hey, this is a threat to all of us. We need to put our differences aside and team up, or at that point, are they just kind of out of the storyline and are we into a different story?
I haven't thought far enough ahead, so I don't have a clear vision. But I could imagine off the top of my head, it would probably be something where they start figuring it out, and Shredder wants to obviously take advantage of it for his own power.
Hmm.
And I think Shredder would begrudgingly team up with the Turtles because he'd think, if I can't control the world, no one else is allowed to control the world or space time or whatever it
Right.
is. And so he would work with the Turtles just enough to let them, and Karai would also facilitate part of this relationship to be like, look, we need to get this back. And also, I thought maybe for a Super Shredder thing was that Shredder actually gets mind controlled as well by the other
Mm,
faction, and you have to fight this weird version of Super Shredder as a boss somewhere in the second or third act. Not make him the final boss, but somewhere is like this is another challenge because he came in, like Shredder gets whisked away as well, but he's off in another part. He gets taken advantage of because he doesn't understand what's going on, and then also he's is a fan of power, so like maybe the guy like offers him the ability to, or whoever it is offers him power in exchange for cooperating, and of course Shredder's always working to double double cross because he wants to be in complete control. So I could see that towards the end is the finale, is everyone's playing their part. The Foot Clan, Shredder orders the Foot Clan to do a part of this to try and stop whoever, and then it would probably just be part of the ending cutscene where the Shredder then reveals like I'm trying to like, oh you fools, I was always
mm.
going to try and take this. How could you ever think that I would settle for second best or for to bow to anyone else? And then the
Right.
Turtles, I wouldn't say have to fight Shredder, but it'd just be like a closing climactic where the Turtles like we can't, despite the fact that any good could come of this, we have to stop it because can't let the Shredder will always be awful. Or maybe even Karai would, and I think Karai would step in and just make it kind of try to make it look like an accident, and she would try to reason with Shredder and be like, I understand, but this will just lead to disaster. It's too much power for any one person to control or something. And of course, Shredder would be
Hmm.
taken aback by that to be like, it's how dare you doubt me?
Yeah.
Uh, but make it look like an accident so the turtles could then get a hold of whatever it was and stop it and destroy it, and then they'd all go back to normal. And Shredder would of course be upset, but he'd just go like, well, going back to my normal routine of trying to take over the city and then the world.
Yeah, sounds cool. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I think that would be a really fun game to play and to explore, and stuff definitely different from Turtles games in the past, which I think me and you both are looking to get into with this. So yeah, I think that sounds awesome.
Yeah, and one of the things, because one of my favorite story mini arcs, I should say, because it was in both 2003 and the original series, is that gemstone where when you draw things, it turns into reality. And I think in the 2003, I don't remember if in the original, but in 2003 they actually create like a separate dimensional space,
Yeah,
and Donnie goes in it.
I think that was actually from the original comic is where it came from. I believe they did like you know how they do like micro series or whatever they call them of like
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
character. I think that was Donatello's. Like
Yep.
that was all specifically about him.
Yeah.
I could be wrong again. Like we talked about earlier, I'm not super knowledgeable about the original comics because that wasn't what I grew up with. But
Yep.
yeah, as far as I know, that was where it came from, and then they pretty much did a very similar story in the 2003 cartoon, like you said, which was yeah interesting. I thought that was a really cool idea as well.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing where, and there's been the multi-dimensional, other aspects of multi-dimensional, but that's the specific one that always sticks out. Since I fancied myself an artist as a hobby, and I like
Hmm.
drawing and stuff like that. Thought it was amazing with that concept of like, oh my God, whatever you draw just comes to life. Like, oh, it's the coolest thing that could happen. So,
And for your point about like multi dimensions and maybe an evil Donatello or whatever, they have established the multi dimensions like in that the movie we talked about, the Turtles Forever, the turtles from 2003 go into the original cartoon, the 87
hmm.
Turtles dimension, and then they go into the original comic dimension. And I think there's even a scene where they show pictures from even like the movies and stuff
Oh
like that.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and then in the 2012 cartoon, they interact with the 87 Turtles. They come into their dimension. So, I think that's a cool, it's definitely, it wouldn't be unrealistic. Like it's something that they've acknowledged is a thing. Like there are other dimensions like these, there are these other turtles in alternate universes and stuff like that. So it's not, something that's totally unrealistic in the turtles world.
yeah. Does the 2013 series have any multi-dimension stuff, or is it pretty much mutants and aliens?
It has, I'm trying to think. It has, well, like I said, so they do the 87 Turtles, the original cartoon, they do cross over.
Oh yeah, that's right. Oh, I remember seeing the previews for that.
Yeah, so they have that, and they have some time travel stuff. Renette, who has like a time scepter, comes from the future,
Hmm.
and there's an arc where they have to go through time in a couple episodes. And then, like you said, there's some space stuff too, some alien stuff. But yeah, as far as multi-dimension, from what I could remember, it's yeah they do stuff with the 87 Turtles, and the 87 Shredder and Krang come over as well. So it's actually kind of cool. I don't want to spoil too much because I know you haven't
Sure.
seen it before,
Yeah.
but they actually do work the 87 Krang into part of the storyline. So
Yeah.
like how this version of Krang in the 2012 is an entire group, like they're called the Krang and they're all evil and
Yep.
stuff like that. So their basics, the storyline they kind of came up with is that like that 87 Krang was part of this whole Krang group at one point, and he got banished to that dimension. So that's why he's in that dimension.
Gotcha. That's cool.
And and it does kind of work because if I remember in that original cartoon, they do talk about like Krang being banished. So it
Hmm.
does, it actually kind of works pretty well together. I thought it was neat how they actually tied that whole thing in together.
Nice. Yes. So okay, it does. That series does actively envision multiverse as well. I'm not sure where the
Yeah.
comics go with some of that stuff, so that might
Yeah.
be something. But of course, it just shows tons of Turtles canon embraces those things, plus magic and things. So I would probably go somewhere more with magic based because I think that's a way better excuse for why things get weird and crazy. So Yeah, that's more of what I'd like to see is the turtles because I want them in different environments. I want the characters to act like ninjas and do some of the more investigative and non-combative, interesting aspects of them. And I know that doesn't always make for the most compelling gameplay for certain audiences, but I think it'd be much more faithful to the many dimensions of the turtles and the turtle series and the way they've done with storytelling in that. So that's
Yeah.
what I'd hope for with that. Besides other like co-op brawlers that are just better made, and maybe it also adds some of those elements where the turtles are much more unique in terms of their ability sets and move sets to interact with the environments and combat encounters.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. Sounds awesome.
Well, I think we just came up with two great game ideas, and hopefully someone will be talented enough and smart enough to steal our ideas and make them someday, or
There you go.
they'll one of the studios or licensees of Turtles will wisen up and be like, "Hey, Turtles is still a huge license. Maybe we should let a studio have a bunch of money and time to be able to just make the Ultimate Ninja Turtles games like the way Batman was with all its series, or the way Spider-Man just recently was, and just go ahead, make a giant good video game with this license thing instead of us trying to rush it out for a TV series or toys release or a movie and just let someone actually just make a good video game."
That would be great. Yeah. That sounds fantastic.
Regardless. So that's great. And I'm sure we'll talk about this and have all these different ideas later on and those discussions. But before we go, I did want to end with some more fun stuff. Because with us having our favorite turtles, you being Donatello, mine being Leonardo, I did want to ask you if you've ever thought about if you were in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles universe, would you want to how would you envision yourself as a character in there? Would you literally just take on the role of Donatello, or do you feel like you could see yourself as like your own turtle with your own color and weapon, or a character in there because there's numerous other mutants that can be cool or aliens. So if you were to self-insert yourself into Ninja Turtles universe, what character would that be? If you have an idea, it's completely fine if you're just like I've never even thought about it.
I think, and I don't know if it's just because he's my favorite, but I think it would probably be Donatello. I had always, I think maybe that's why he was my favorite because I felt I related to him the
Hmm.
most. So I feel like I would kind of drop in there. I think because he always seemed like maybe the more quiet one or more laid back. Like I don't know, I guess like myself, I'm not nearly that smart, obviously, but
Hmm. Hmm.
I feel like if I was in a group of four like that, I would be most similar to his personality.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I think if I had to drop myself into there, it would probably be as Donatello.
Very cool. Yeah, it's really tough for me because if I was to envision myself as a new turtle, like I do like Leonardo a lot. I really like the idea of him being the leader, and that's something like I kind of would always like to aspire to is trying to be a leader and the respect that comes with that role. Also, like my favorite color is green, so all the turtles are really awesome. But I also my
Yeah, mine too,
secondary
actually.
awesome. My second being blue, so him being the blue clad turtle and the double swords is awesome. So I've really kind of felt like that, but personality wise, well, there's certain things, the conviction and the stubbornness, and always trying to do the right thing. I do relate to Leonardo in that regard, and always trying to do things, trying to be considerate for everyone else. But there's certain aspects of Leo that definitely don't mesh with mine. So it's I don't know how I could do like a green turtle or do a non-sword weapon because I kind of do like all that stuff. So I guess I'm kind of copping out on my own question here. But if I'm trying to think, I don't know. I think I'd want like a single sword. I think I'd do like a single sword. But I'd want it to be like, oh man, I could do like sword and shield. Obviously they have like the shells, but it's not like an active sword and shield. But I guess I'd want it to be like a sword with a combination of some other gadget for
Mhm.
for moving around. But I don't know how how a green turtle would look. Do you know if there's any turtles with white headbands? Maybe that'd be the compromise. I'd pick like a white headband.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
that'd be kind of unique.
yeah, because Jenica's got the yellow. Venus, they just did a light blue back when
Yeah,
she
it's light
existed,
blue.
which I always thought was like a cop out. But I guess they didn't want
Right.
to do pink, which would also have been like a cop out on Raph. But maybe that would have been no, that would have yeah, that would have been super stereotypical and corny.
Yeah, light blue
Um,
is just too similar. It was like it
yeah,
wasn't like that noticeable of a difference.
yeah, and there's not a lot of other colors that that blend well. Like I guess I mean Slash has usually had the black headband, and they've tried to avoid that. And then the new comic does show a turtle wearing a black headband, so
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense there. Or that could be weird. Or and sometimes they wear do rags instead of just the like well
Yeah,
or headband with the do rag, not just
yeah. And
or
I think
bandana,
in
full
the
bandana.
I think in the Michael Bay movies, I think
Hmm.
Raphael's got the bandana permanently. I think that's just like his thing is like he's got the red bandana. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, I'd probably go with white as that and do like a single sword plus a combination of some other gizmo or something to complement that. Would be fun if I was to do like a turtle. But yeah, that's if I was to try and be creating my own turtle OC. Uh, yeah, super fun. So, all right. Then before we go, just was there anything else turtle-wise that you're looking forward to? You say you haven't finished the 2013 series, or you did finish it?
I did finish it. Yeah, I binged it. I finished it pretty fast for considering how many episodes there were. I would watch like 4 per day. It was so good. So
Nice.
yeah, I'm done with that. Well, yeah, what I'm looking forward to. Let's see. I would love. We've talked about this before, but I really want to get that Turtles arcade cabinet they have at
Mm-hmm.
Walmart. I think it is. Not just for my Turtles room. It would be an awesome piece for my Turtles room, but I think it would be fun to play too. So
Yep.
I guess that would probably be up there.
And I've
Yeah,
offered to split that with you because I know it's kind of expensive. So,
yeah, yeah. So yeah, we
because I would
will.
totally play it with you as soon as
Yeah,
we're comfortable with actually being in person again, or things settle down and
yeah.
get
One of these days, hopefully.
yeah, and we'll try to do something else online. So hopefully there'll be another Turtles game. There's supposedly another movie in the works, and
Yeah,
they'll
Seth Rogen. I don't know
oh
how I feel
yeah,
about that. He's
we'll see.
he's great. Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it. So I know we're going to get off on a tangent, but
It's okay.
I I was thinking about it after I thought, and I'm like, I don't really love any Seth Rogen movies. The more I thought about it, like,
Mm.
I
Hmm.
like 40-Year-Old Virgin, which he's in, but other than that, I was trying to think, and I'm like, I just don't like Seth Rogen movies. Maybe that's just me. Maybe they're too like drug heavy typically. I
Yeah,
don't know, and that's not for me. I don't know if that's why, but I don't know. It is going to be animated from what I heard, which I like.
that's
I
good.
like the idea of. I think we've talked about this in the past. Either I want either fully animated or like fully live action. I don't want any of this how it was in the Michael Bay movies where it's kind of
Yeah,
half and half. I don't know.
I
I don't want
agree.
any of that. Go fully animated or just do full live action like they did in the originals. So
Fully
I do
agree.
like the idea that it's fully animated, and maybe he's a big Turtles fan. I don't really know his history. I mean, maybe he likes the turtle. Maybe he's a fan, and he's going to bring back a lot of the stuff we've been asking for. So
Yeah,
I'm open minded about it. But yeah, that was my initial thought when I heard it. Was like I don't like Seth Rogen movies, so I don't know how I'm going to feel about this. But I guess we'll see.
nice. So I think yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. I don't remember if I'll have to look and see. I think there was like a Rise of TMNT game. I'll have to see if that's what that looks
Yeah,
like or
that
something.
sounds right. Yeah,
We'll be trying to figure out if we can play one of the arcade browser ports online or something, and we'll keep an eye out for other games. And of course, we'll be talking about other video games. Maybe we should get together and talk Resident Evil on an episode. But
definitely.
trying to cycle through, give everyone a topic because Mike and I talked about Smash Brothers and then Mario Kart, which is by the time you hear this episode, the Mario Kart episode will be out, so no problem with that. You and I have just done our TMNT episode, and we're trying to work. I'm working with Mark right now to figure out what episode he wants to spearhead. The Xbox episode was
Nice.
not, despite the fact that he hosted it, that's not specifically that because we did that because of news, not one of the fun topics like this one where we were just like, hey, we want to talk about a thing and we're doing it. So listeners can
Yeah,
look forward to that.
I'd be
And
all about a Resident Evil one because unlike the Turtle games, I've actually played pretty much every Resident Evil game, except for a couple of those weird ones like Survivor and
sure,
some of
yeah,
those kind of oddball ones. But as far as just like the main story games and even some of the offshoots like Revelations and Revelations 2, so even stuff like that. So yeah, I'd be up for doing that because I do have a good knowledge of those, having played pretty much all of them, and I know you have as well. So
yes.
yeah, so that's something to look forward to down the line,
And with the
perhaps.
upcoming Resident Evil 8, so there's Tokyo Game Show's coming up, so there might be a trailer. But
Yes.
yeah, we'll save all that for another episode where we're just trying to have fun here, and so we'll do that whenever it makes sense, and we're down for it. So I'm gonna wish everyone out there a cowabunga, and Paul, if you could join me in a synchronized turtle power to close the episode.
Sounds good.
So on three, Turtle power. You got it? You ready?
Yep.
All right. One, two, three. Turtle
Turtle
power!
power.
All right. Thanks everyone for being with us today. We'll catch you on the next episode.
See ya.